Steelers fans, we have our next head coach, the fourth head coach in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers as the white smoke comes out of Acrisure Stadium. And, guys, this is a job where there's more popes at this point than Pittsburgh Steelers head coaches. And, it's a pretty historic moment whenever we get a new head coach in this city. Unfortunately, for a lot of Steelers fans that wanted to go younger and more modern and wanted to go in a new modern direction with this football team, they have hired 18-year NFL head coaching veteran Mike McCarthy to be their next head coach. He is a Pittsburgh native. He worked with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel in New Orleans in the early 2000s. He has helped develop some of the smartest quarterbacks in the NFL over the last 2 decades, including Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott. He helped revitalize the career of Brett Favre when he took the Packers job in 2007. This is definitely a hire where, personally, I would have rather gone with somebody that was younger, somebody that would have brought a little bit more of a modern approach to the organization. But Mike, what I will say, has a QB development history. He does have a very good track record in terms of winning football games and, getting his teams to the postseason. Winning in the postseason, like Mike Tomlin, is a different story, at least recently there in Dallas. But we're going to be discussing everything that this means for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll tell you what the offense will look like. We'll talk about what this means for the future of Aaron Rodgers in the quarterback position. We'll talk about who he could hire as the defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll talk about, everything that there is to be talked about when it comes to this hire, because this is a very historic moment in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers, for better or for worse. We're going to be getting to your super chats here in just a moment. But first, let's have a word from our sponsor here on today's breaking news edition of Steelers Talk Live, which is Prize Picks. And guys, the big game in Santa Clara is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means that's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close the season outright with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature from Prize Picks that Prize Picks now has is early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So the report came in from Tom Pelissero today saying, coming home, the Steelers are working towards a deal to hire Mike McCarthy as their next head coach. Per sources, McCarthy grew up in Pittsburgh. Now at age 62, the Super Bowl winner gets a chance to coach the team he grew up rooting for. And, as much as I maybe would have rather gone Chris Shula or Anthony Weaver or maybe even Brian Flores before I would have hired Mike McCarthy, we'll discuss the reasons why the Steelers did make this hire. And just on a personal human level, I feel really good for Mike. He's somebody that grew up in Pittsburgh as a Steelers fan. He understands what this team means to the city of Pittsburgh. And, one thing that I know for sure is that Mike will be giving his best to this job every single day. We'll talk about whether or not we think he will do a good job here throughout the course of the show. Make sure you guys super chat on today's show. If you guys have a comment, if you guys want to vent, if you guys want to, say you want to boycott the Pittsburgh Steelers, there's a lot of different stuff being said on social media right now, most of it being negative when it comes to this hire, but we're here to talk about it, man. That's what we're here to do here today. So if you have something to say, if you have something that you have a question about, if there's a topic that you want to discuss, make sure you guys click that subscribe button and then put in those super chats today if you haven't already. I greatly appreciate your guys' support. All right, man, let's get into some of these super chats. $2 coming in from Misfit Trail Rider. Says, Jack, I honestly don't know how to feel about this. It's certainly different than what the Steelers have done. It's weird because it's the same thing that the Steelers have done, but also different than what the Steelers have done throughout their history. It's the same because you're getting an older head coach that that's what the main issue was with a lot of people with Mike Tomlin, right? Was that Mike Tomlin couldn't get the job done in the postseason. When you look at the records and the profiles of Mike McCarthy and Mike Tomlin, very similar career records in the regular season. Mike actually has more playoff wins than Mike does. In fact, he has 3 more than Mike does. They both have 1 Super Bowl. They're both really well-respected guys within the league. They're both long-tenured head coaches. Tomlin's been a head coach 19 years. McCarthy's been a head coach 18 years. But, you get a guy here in Mike McCarthy that's 62 years old, almost double the age of, the next oldest head coach hire for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's what's different here, right? First of all, it's the first offensive-minded head coach hire in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's the one way that this is different. Then the second way this is different is he's a lot older. And, you just have to wonder, is he really going to be here for 15 plus years the way that, Mike Tomlin was and Chuck Noll was? And, this does feel a little bit like a shorter term sort of solution here at the head coaching position. It's definitely, for me, Misfit Trail Riders, I'll know a lot more how I feel about this new regime when we hire the defensive coordinator. Because if we hire fucking Mike Nolan or Mike Zimmer to be the next defensive coordinator of the Steelers, I'm going to be a little bit upset about that for sure. But if they can bring in, a pretty darn good defensive mind. I mean, McCarthy was the guy that hired Dan Quinn in Dallas, and he helped develop Micah Parsons, and he got the most out of guys like Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland. So Mike is somebody that has a lot of connections in the league. And because of that, theoretically, that means he could put together a really good staff here. Now, will he put together that good staff? Will he go with, younger, especially on the defensive side of the ball, mind? I certainly think that is something that's possible, but plain simply, guys, I think that Steelers made this decision for 3 reasons. Number one, the stability that Mike McCarthy has brought throughout his head coaching career. I think he has 11 double-digit win seasons in 18 years. He's made the playoffs in 12 of his 18 years, so that's 2/3 of his seasons. He's won a Super Bowl. He's got double-digit playoff wins. Right now, he's got the 3rd most playoff wins out of any head coach in the league. The only ones that have more, I believe, are it's Andy Reid and John Harbaugh might have more than Mike McCarthy at this point. But, man, I think the defensive coordinator will mean a lot. Second reason why the Steelers probably brought this guy in, Mike McCarthy, is it increases their chances of getting Aaron Rodgers back. It's been well reported that the Steelers players in the locker room really, really, really want to bring him back. We don't have to show those, Gage. We can just do Venmos and Super Chats to start here. So Aaron Rodgers, I think, has a decent chance of returning next year. And then the third reason is he has a QB development track record. He helped Rich Gannon in the second act of his career in Kansas City. Then he did a good job in New Orleans as well. Then he goes to Green Bay, revitalizes the career of Brett Favre. Then he develops Aaron Rodgers into one of the best quarterbacks of all time. Then he goes to Dallas and he takes Dak Prescott. And people forget, Dak Prescott was not the best quarterback in the world when Mike McCarthy got there. By the time he left, Dak was, an MVP first runner-up. He, led some of the best offenses in the league. He had 3 straight 12-win seasons. And Dak Prescott, even to this day, who, by the way, the Cowboys still run a Mike McCarthy-style offense in Dallas, and they were a top 10 offense this year. Dak Prescott has turned into a top 10 quarterback because of the tutelage under Mike McCarthy. So I think those are the 3 reasons why they made this hire. Stability, leadership that's proven over the course of 18 years in the National Football League, Aaron Rodgers connection, and then QB development. So those are, I would say, the 3 reasons why they made this hire. $2 here from Uriah Brobst says, "Hey, Jack, what's the definition of insanity?" And I know that what he's referring to there is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting the same results. But I will say Mike McCarthy, even though he's got, a similar, profile to Mike Tomlin in terms of his record as a head coach and all that different stuff, the playoff stuff and the narratives surrounding these two men, they are, obviously one, does run One is a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Tomlin. I think Tomlin is a better leader than Mike McCarthy is, plain and simply. But I think where Mike has the leg up on a guy like Mike Tomlin is his offensive structure. And his offense, by the way, it was like the number one scoring offense in the league in 2023. That's just a couple years ago, guys. This is still an offense that, can produce results if you have the right players. And he's got that quarterback development track record. So if the goal is to get the next franchise quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers and to develop him, Mike does have a long track record of doing that. And if it means, you have the luxury of bringing back an older Aaron Rodgers for another year to allow those younger quarterbacks to develop for a year here in 2026, I can understand why the Steelers made this decision. But certainly, if you're going to go from Mike Tomlin, this does feel like you're replacing him with the offensive version of Mike Tomlin, right? A guy that, has a very good regular season record, but, hasn't recently got it done in the playoffs and won his Super Bowl a long time ago, right? I mean, Mike McCarthy's only been to one Super Bowl, and it was against the Steelers with Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback against Mike Tomlin, right? So that's how long it's been since Mike McCarthy has even been to a Super Bowl. And, he had Aaron Rodgers for years and, never got back to another one. And then, obviously only won one playoff game in Dallas with Dak Prescott, with how good those offenses and defenses were at times. So, listen, man, for a fan base that is so hungry for playoff success, to get a guy in Mike McCarthy that, the whole narrative around him in Dallas was he couldn't win the big game. He couldn't, get his team to win in the postseason. I understand the frustration. I really do. I definitely get it. And personally, I was somebody that was hoping for Chris Shula. I was hoping for a Brian Flores. I was hoping for an Anthony Weaver. But, I will say I have an open mind to Mike McCarthy because I have seen this offense work in Dallas over the last several years. I've seen it work in terms of developing young quarterback talent and just veteran quarterback talent. We saw that with Dak Prescott in Dallas. We saw that with Rodgers and Favre in Green Bay. I think that's one of the big reasons why he's now the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cody Greenwood, $2 says 1,000% worst case scenario, sell the team. Well, the Rooneys will, who knows when and if they would ever sell the team. They're one of the more cash-poor ownership groups in the league, which is why, by the way, they don't pay their coaching staffs all that much compared to other teams, is because they're not as rich as other ownership groups are. So I understand why people think this is a worst-case scenario because Mike McCarthy has a narrative around him. And something that I will say, guys, is that Mike McCarthy is clearly more highly respected in the NFL than he is among fans. Because I think with fans, what fans tend to focus on is playoff record, right? And especially recent playoff record. That's why fans were not big fans of Mike Tomlin when, he was towards the end of his time with the Steelers. But, the league obviously really respects Mike Tomlin. Why is that the case? The reason for that is, people in the NFL respect people that can consistently drive success at the head coaching position. And that, is what Mike McCarthy has done. He's got an over 60% win percentage. He's gotten his team to the playoffs in 2/3 of the seasons he's been a coach. He has won a Super Bowl. He has developed quarterback talent. And, I think people in the league understand just how hard it is to win in the regular season in the National Football League consistently, and they respect the people and the head coaches that can consistently deliver those results. But, I think what fans care about, and I don't disagree with the fans on this, by the way, is what have you done in the playoffs and what specifically have you done in the playoffs recently, and especially with all these younger head coaches being hired, like the Sean McVays and Kyle Shanahan's and everything in that regard. Everybody wants a younger head coach. It's all the craze. Nobody wants, a 62-year-old guy that's already been fired by two separate organizations. But, something I will say is I think, Mike McCarthy is a very well-respected guy in NFL circles, and hopefully that means he can build a good staff. But I tell you what, man, you look at the 2 years where he did not have a good defensive coordinator in Dallas, with Mike Nolan his first year there, and then with Mike Zimmer his final year in Dallas. It wasn't good at all. So I can't stress enough how important the defensive coordinator hire is going to be here in Pittsburgh. You got to get the DC right. If you are Mike McCarthy, you cannot hire Mike Zimmer. You cannot hire Mike Nolan. You cannot hire Don Capers. All right, you have to get somebody in this room and that to run the defense with as much talent as we have on the defensive side of the ball. You have to bring in somebody that can get the most out of that group. Hopefully he can hire a Dan Quinn level guy and like we can win 12, 13 games, like he did in Dallas for 3 straight seasons. Won a playoff game in Dallas during that time, beat Tom Brady on the road in a playoff game. In fact, that was Tom Brady's final game of his career. Mike McCarthy beat Tom Brady in the final game of his career. But I'm keeping an open mind. It's not the pick that I would have made, guys, but I am keeping an open mind. I'm certainly going to be cheering for this football team moving forward. Hot Rod with it, too, says I'm hoping this is a temporary hire, not permanent. Well, it's a permanent hire, Hot Rod, at least for the time being. Like, obviously, if McCarthy sucks and this team takes a huge step backwards and it's as disastrous as people think it's going to be, then, yeah, they will fire him or he will step down and they will find somebody new down the road. But listen, man, this is a team and a franchise that is extremely, extremely, extremely patient with their head coaches, okay? And as long as this team is remaining competitive, Mike McCarthy is going to be the head coach of this team for a while. And I just want people to, get used to that idea because, this is an ownership group and, a team that doesn't like to fire head coaches. They've never done it. They've literally never fired a head coach. So I think McCarthy gets at least 3 years here in Pittsburgh, unless it's just an absolute unmitigated disaster. Yeah, man, I think that's where we're at. I think we get at least 3 years of McCarthy before they even think about firing him. And, if he wins a playoff game or if this team goes on a run with McCarthy as head coach, that's going to buy him a lot of time. And as long as this team is staying quote-unquote competitive and, they're competing for, playoff berths and making the playoffs, like McCarthy is going to be sticking around, just like Mike Tomlin stuck around for as long as he did. So, if you're hoping that this is a 1 year or 2 year thing, I would not get my hopes up for that. I think Mike McCarthy's here at least for a while. $2 from Blake says McCarthy is a patsy. Cheers to a top 5 pick in 2027. I'll say this, Blake. If he hires the wrong defensive coordinator and they make the wrong choice at quarterback, whatever that ends up being, it's very possible we could be that bad next year. Now, what I'll say is I think that, the Steelers have a pretty good foundation in place. They do. All right, they did a really good job building up the trenches on both sides of the ball. Okay, the only spot you really need to worry about this offseason on the offensive line is left guard, and there's some very, very attainable solutions to what you want to do at that position. Then on the defensive line, you still got a bunch of talent. This team is not that far away from being a more complete team than they were in 2025. Like, what was the main thing? What was the main 2 things, in my opinion, that were the main things holding this team back last year? In my opinion, it was the lack of wide receiver depth and wide receiver talent outside of DK Metcalf. And then it was the defense wasn't as good as it needed to be. So, in theory, if Mike McCarthy and Omar Khan, as this new tandem here in Pittsburgh, can get the right receivers to pair with DK Metcalf and whoever the quarterback's going to be this year. And I would say at this point, guys, I would say the betting favorite to be the week 1 starting quarterback is Aaron Rodgers. I think Rodgers will want to come back to play for Mike McCarthy. He loves the guys in the locker room. He said back in 2024 that he would want to play for McCarthy again if McCarthy got a head coaching job last year. Of course, he didn't. But the fact that Rodgers loves it here in Pittsburgh, he played, decent football here in Pittsburgh this year with a bad wide receiver room. You can see how with Aaron Rodgers, second-year continuity in an offense that he already knows very well, with some built-in, chemistry with the guys that are already in the locker room. Then you add a couple of good pieces at wide receiver. You can see how you can make a case for this Steelers offense being better next season than it was this past year. And then if he brings in the right defensive coordinator, like if he hires, one of the top defensive coordinator guys on the market here, and and he gets somebody of akin to Dan Quinn, like if he hires Al Harris or something like that, or Carl Scott from Seattle, if he hires one of these guys that are up-and-coming defensive minds, or Durante Jones from the Minnesota Vikings, that would be a slam dunk hire, in my opinion. If he hires a really good defensive coordinator to get the most out of this defense and the talent that we have here, and you can get a couple more receivers this offseason, Rodgers comes back, like you can see how this Steelers team is a little bit like last year, but only better because the wide receiver room will be better, and the offensive coordinator is better. Because I do believe Mike McCarthy, as an offensive play caller, is an upgrade to Arthur Smith. I mean, Mike McCarthy offenses are still active in the National Football League. The Dallas Cowboys were a top 10 offense this year running a McCarthy offense. They were a top 2 offense in the league back when Dak and CD were healthy. The last season Mike had a healthy Dak and CD back in 2023. This guy won games with Cooper Rush at quarterback. All right, like, I'm telling you, man, like Mike McCarthy, in terms of offensive minds you could have hired, there's worse offensive minds out there. There truly is. And this team already has a lot of good pieces in place. A good young offensive line. If Rodgers comes back, I almost guarantee they bring back Kenny Gainwell. You've got Warren and Gainwell again. You've got Washington and Freiermuth coming back at tight end. Got DK locked up. And if you spend your first-round pick on a really good receiver, and there's a lot of good round 1 receivers this year, and you get another good player like in free agency, like I'm guessing Rodgers would want to sign Romeo Doubs. Like, you look at that offense, you got McCarthy running the show on offense, and this is, a modern offense, guys. It is. Like, I know people are saying it's old school because McCarthy's 62, but McCarthy changed his offense and modernized it when he was in Dallas, and, the results are really good. You have Rodgers at quarterback, a super intelligent quarterback, right? Then you got 2 really good running backs. Then you've got, a young, up-and-coming O-line. You got 2 really good tight ends. You got DK Metcalf, a first-round pick at wide receiver, and then Romeo Doubs or somebody else in free agency. That's a good offense. That's a pretty good offense right there. And then if he gets the right DC to get the most out of this defense, like Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin could not do, then I do think the Steelers next year could be better than they were in 2025 under Mike McCarthy. I do think that's a possibility. But like I said, guys, you got to get the right receivers and you got to get the right defensive coordinator for that plan to come to fruition. And Rodgers has to agree to come back for another season. So those 3 things need to happen for that to even be a possibility. I don't think they'll have a top 5 pick next year. I think the team is too good to be in the top 5 conversation. I truly believe that. Josh Dom says, Steelers forget this is entertainment business. Time after time, they keep ignoring fans. I would rather suck for 3 years with hope instead of deja vu. I still have, I'll describe it as an open mind when it comes to Mike Tomlin. I understand the frustration because the record with Mike McCarthy, like when you talk about Mike McCarthy, a lot of people call him the offensive version of Mike Tomlin. And like a lot of Steelers fans wanted to move on from Tomlin, right? So, especially because so many people were getting their hopes up for Shula and were saying that it's Shula or bust. If we don't hire Shula, it can't be a good hire, all these different things. But, I do have an open mind because I have seen Mike McCarthy have success in this league. And, the starting spot that he's getting here in Pittsburgh, it's not a terrible starting spot. This roster, is not that far away. This is a team that is coming off a division championship and a 10-win season. And that was with some pretty big roster holes. And I do think Mike is a capable, stable leader in the locker room. He's got a good offensive system, especially if you have a smart quarterback like Aaron Rodgers. If you add a couple receivers and you hire the right defensive coordinator to make the most out of this defensive talent we have here, I don't think this is as big of a disaster as people want to make it out to be. Now, maybe I'm coping or whatever. You can say whatever you want, but I truly believe this is not as bad as people want to make it out to be. $5 from Clyde the Glide says, I'm being positive, and I'm hoping we're looking at Andy Reid 2.0. Yeah, man, and, I don't know. Because here's the thing. Andy Reid, before he got Patrick Mahomes, was seen as somebody very similar to Mike McCarthy, somebody that was a really good offensive coach, but couldn't win the big game, couldn't win the playoffs, all that different stuff. He got fired in Philly, all right? And then in the early portion of his Kansas City tenure when he had Alex Smith, it was very similar. Like, the team was good. They won a lot in the regular season, but they couldn't advance in the playoffs because they didn't have that dude at quarterback. If you get Mike McCarthy, the right quarterback, like we have seen in his time in Green Bay and in his time in Dallas in particular, all right? Like Dak Prescott, is Dak Prescott, an all-world physical talent? No. What makes Dak Prescott special? It's his mind. And he developed that football acumen and football IQ working in Mike McCarthy's offense. He has had the best years of his career operating a Mike McCarthy offense. And, because of Mike's track record developing quarterback talent, especially young quarterback talent, it gives me hope that, whoever the future at quarterback is, whether it's Will Howard, whether it's somebody that they draft either this year or next, whoever the future is at quarterback here in Pittsburgh, Mike McCarthy has a track record of developing QB talent. So that quarterback, especially if Aaron Rodgers is there to mentor him through it all, has a really good infrastructure in place. They just do, all right? They've got a good young offensive line. I'm assuming they're going to add some more quality wide receiver talent to this room. You got 2 good tight ends, 2 good running backs, an offensive play caller that is proven in Mike McCarthy. Like, for a young quarterback, there's not a whole lot of places you would rather go than the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. And I know people don't like this hire, so they don't want to admit that, but that's, in my opinion, the truth. This is a good place for a young quarterback to develop, and maybe that is Will Howard. Maybe, that's Ty Simpson. Maybe that's, going out and getting a Will Levis to back up Rodgers for a year, and you can try and, rehabilitate him. I don't know what the plan's going to be, guys. But what I do know is that this offense can still work in the modern NFL. Just look at the Dallas Cowboys. I do think it increases the chances of Aaron Rodgers returning, which the players in the locker room clearly want. And he's got a track record of developing QB talent. And, what is the main thing people have been talking about? The next head coach needs to develop a quarterback. And if you would have hired Chris Shula, defensive-minded head coach. If you would have hired Anthony Weaver, defensive-minded head coach. Look at the history of these quarterbacks, man, that tend to develop nicely. More often than not, they develop with offensive-minded guys. So, would I have personally gone with Chris Shula or Anthony Weaver? Yes, I would have. Just being completely transparent, I would have gone younger. I would have modernized. But, I think that there's worse things the Steelers could have done than this. And I do have an open mind moving forward. $5 here from Beeman says, fuck it, I'll take a top 10 offense, get that defense a playoff win, and Art is forgiven. I personally don't want to be ass. Let's at least beat the Birds. And, I look at this situation, man, and like I just said, I think this situation is better than people give it credit for. This is a very talented defense, and one of the biggest issues with the Mike Tomlin regime and Terrell Austin is they did not get the most out of this group. They just didn't. But if Mike McCarthy can hire the right DC, and this is why I cannot stress enough, guys, how important hiring the next defensive coordinator is here in Pittsburgh. You have to get that hire right. Because if you hire a Mike Zimmer or a Mike Nolan or somebody that is not going to get the job done, and this defense is not living up to the standard, then yeah, it's going to be more of the same here in Pittsburgh. But if McCarthy can hire his next Dan Quinn, if he can hire somebody that's going to get the job done here in Pittsburgh and get the most out of this defense, and he improves the offense, which I think he will, we're looking at an improved Pittsburgh Steelers team from where they were in 2025. And that's something to at least keep in mind. JV Free with a 5 says, right choice at this time. Aaron back, develop quarterback, win now and in the future. For every Ben Johnson, there are 5 Aaron Glenns, a real plan, not hopium. And I think this is a good sobering take here from JV. Now, listen, man, a lot of the big time head coaching hires over the last several years have not been of the kind of the Mike McCarthys, right? It's been more of the Ben Johnsons and the Kyle Shanahans and the Sean McVays and the Matt LaFleurs. The younger guys have really had a ton of success. And I understand why Steelers fans wanted to go younger. I personally wanted to go younger, okay? But, just because what I wanted to happen didn't happen doesn't mean that what they actually went with can't work. Okay, look at the quarterback market this year, guys. Like, the plan people wanted was a defensive-minded head coach paired with Will Howard. That's going to bring us success in 2026. Like, I'm sorry, man. I wouldn't have minded a defensive-minded head coach, but like, if Mike McCarthy hires the right defensive coordinator and this defense is better than what it's been the last several years under Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin, like, we could be looking at a Steelers team that could legitimately win 12 or 13 games next year if they make the right choices at wide receiver and in free agency at their other spots, and then when you have a guy with the history of developing quarterback talent the way that Mike McCarthy does, like, if the goal is to draft and then develop a young quarterback of the future, like, Mike McCarthy, has shown a track record of doing that. So I know a lot of people wanted to go offense, right? A lot of people said we should hire an offensive head coach, and a lot of people wanted Shieldhouse, right? Shieldhouse has never even called plays in the National Football League. Mike McCarthy has called plays for a number of years while being a head coach and has made the playoffs in 2/3 of the seasons where he's led football teams. All right, like, obviously, when he gets to the playoffs, he needs to deliver, but like, this is like, there's worse things that the Steelers could have done, in my opinion, to JV Free's point. Jagger with a 5 says, I don't trust him drafting. I don't think he ever drafted in Dallas or Green Bay. Well, I mean, Omar Khan and Andy Weidel are really the ones in charge of the draft. So, I don't think you'd have to worry about that too much, Jagger. Now, obviously, Omar and Andy are going to be working in tandem with McCarthy because they're going to want to know, they're going to want to draft players that fit his scheme. And, Mike's going to have a say in what players we draft. But, like, I trust the scouting department here in Pittsburgh. We've done a really good job with Andy Weidel and Omar Khan drafting some really good, football players. And because of that, we have a decent foundation in place here in Pittsburgh. Okay? And I believe McCarthy drafted CeeDee Lamb. So he knows how to draft high-end wide receiver talent. He knows what that looks like, right? There's a lot of different things there where, he drafted Micah Parsons. So, I don't think this is something you need to worry about too much there, Jagger. I think Mike has been around the block. He knows what good football players look like. And despite the narrative out there, he does run a modern offense. He does. His offense is very similar to Bruce Arians's. And Bruce Arians, with that, option route heavy offense that he ran with Big Ben, it won us our last Super Bowl. Now, I'm not saying McCarthy's definitely going to win a Super Bowl here in Pittsburgh. We'll see. But, like, this is an offense that has had success and has had success very recently. Dallas Cowboys with Dak Prescott, even last year, they still ran Mike McCarthy's, style offense there with Dak Prescott. George Pickens turned into an all-pro in that offense. So, like, here in Pittsburgh, we said, I wish we had an offense that could get the most out of a guy like George Pickens. Guess what? We have that style of offense now with Mike McCarthy. So I think that this is an upgrade on the offensive side of the ball from a schematic standpoint. You get a guy that has a track record of developing quarterbacks. And then if he makes the right hire at defensive coordinator, which is really the X factor here, guys, I cannot stress enough how important the defensive coordinator hire is, because if he gets the right guy there, we're talking about this entire team being better next season than what it was last year under Mike Tomlin. So hopefully he makes that right decision. $10 from W. Tans says the only way for Rooney to listen to us is to boycott this team financially. Don't buy merch, tickets, cancel season passes, and support LND? Independent Steelers channels like Steelers Talk. F. Rooney. I appreciate the support for an independent channel like Steelers Talk there, W. Tans. But listen, man, like, winning cures everything. That's what I'll say. If this team wins with Mike McCarthy, it doesn't matter how the fan base feels right now. And by the way, there's a lot of hires that fan bases have been thrilled with over the years that haven't worked out. And there's been a lot of coaches that have been hired by certain teams that people didn't want. Like, for example, Dan Campbell with the Detroit Lions. Nobody really knew who he was. He was a tight ends coach who had never called plays in New Orleans, gets the head coaching job at Detroit, and he completely changes the culture there, and he's one of the better culture builders in the league. Nobody liked that hire in Detroit when it happened. And it's the best hire they've made in franchise history, arguably. Now, I'm not comparing Mike McCarthy to Dan Campbell, but like, if the Steelers win, and if the Steelers, go win 12 games next year, win the division again next year, the defense turns around under this new defensive coordinator, and they find their next franchise quarterback during this regime, like 2-3 years down the road, people are going to be loving Mike McCarthy. They're not loving him right now because they wanted somebody else. And, feelings are hurt and passions are high, and I understand all that. But, like, winning cures all. That's all I'll say. I understand your frustration. I do. But if Mike McCarthy wins here, I don't think any of this outrage is going to matter in 12 months. $5 from Andrew Ringler. It says it's going to be the same thing every year. Lose, not have a playoff victory. That was certainly the narrative around McCarthy, especially towards the end of his time in Dallas, right? Because he got killed by Jordan Love and the Packers in that playoff game after they had an amazing offense that year. They lost a lot of playoff games in Dallas. I think they went, if I'm not mistaken, they were 1-3 in the postseason under Mike McCarthy in Dallas. And their only win came against, Tom Brady and the Bucs in a super weak NFC South champion that year. 45-year-old Tom Brady's the only guy they could beat in the playoffs. That was with good defenses too. So I understand it, man, because Mike McCarthy has the reputation of being like the offensive version of Mike Tomlin without the leadership. I do think Mike is a better and more commanding leader of men than McCarthy is. But on the other hand there, I think Mike brings a big upgrade to the offensive side in terms of schematics. And frankly, Mike Tomlin's schematics on the defensive side of the ball were getting stale. So guess we'll just have to see. Just have to see, man. $10 from Ian says, I don't know fully how to feel about this just yet. I want to see what he can do for us, but the big thing on my mind is does Kenny Gainwell, if he's re-signed, do we move him to wide receiver 2, or does he become RB1? Well, here's the thing, man. Like, if you're a Kenny Gainwell fan and you want him back this year, I think this hire is good news for you. Because I think if they would have gone with like Shula or Weaver, like, they might not have brought back Kenny G. They probably would have said, okay, we're going to go forward with Caleb Johnson as our future at running back. Because frankly, like, Caleb Johnson fits a McVay or Shanahan-style offense really well. Honestly, I'm not sure how well Caleb Johnson really fits inside this offense anymore because there's a lot of shotgun, it's a lot of spread, and that's not really Caleb Johnson's game. But it is Kenny G's game. So I think what we could see this offseason is Kenny Gainwell getting a new contract here in Pittsburgh, especially if Rodgers is back. Like, if Rodgers comes back, he's going to tell Mike, like, we got to bring this dude back. He's awesome. And then when it comes to the wide receiver positions, you got a lot of cap space to work with. If Rodgers comes back, he will sign another very team-friendly one-year deal. All right, like, he is not going to be expensive at all. So that's going to give you plenty of cap space. And, of course, you got 12 draft picks to figure out the wide receiver position. You still got Muth and Darnell under contract. You still got Jalen under contract. The offensive line, for the most part, is figured out. I'm telling you, man, especially on offense, there's not that much the Steelers need to do this offseason to be like a really good offense next year. Like a legitimately good offense. Like the best offense we've had in Pittsburgh in years. In years. And if that happens, I think, people really begin to warm up to the idea of Mike McCarthy. But he's got to execute on it, man. Like, he's got to execute because the fan base is already low on him. Like, he's already coming in, with the fans, not happy that he's the head coach. He's going to have to win them over, and he's going to have to win them over pretty quickly. So, I do think Kenny Gainwell's chances of coming back to the Pittsburgh Steelers just went up, though. So, if you're a fan of Kenny G, that's some good news here. $2 from Raphael says Shieldhouse as the OC and Anthony Weaver as the DC. The problem with Shieldhouse being the OC, Raphael, is McCarthy doesn't run a McVay-style offense. He runs a very run-and-shoot, kind of old-school West Coast-style offense. Well, quote-unquote old school, because he gives a lot of responsibility to the quarterback. And by the way, guys, this is part of the reason why quarterbacks under Mike McCarthy tend to develop as well as they do, and why they're as smart as they tend to be, is because it requires these quarterbacks to read defensive coverages really, really well. And if you can't read coverages, you cannot play for Mike McCarthy, period. Okay? And the thing with McCarthy's offense is that there's a lot of option routes. Okay? So based on what the defensive coverage is, a wide receiver is going to run a route in a certain way to be open. So the positive to that is that if wide receiver and quarterback are on the same page, the wide receiver more often than not is going to be open. The downside to that is that quarterback and wide receiver need to be on the same page all the time, and you can't afford to be not on the same page. But with Shieldhouse, like, he would run a pure progression style, under center heavy offense similar to what the Rams run. And that's just not what Shieldhouse would be running here in Pittsburgh. Like, Mike McCarthy is probably going to call plays for Pittsburgh guys. So if you're hoping Shieldhouse is going to be the OC, I wouldn't hold my breath. In terms of Anthony Weaver as DC, I would actually like that hire. I know that the Dolphins' defense wasn't terrific this year, but they didn't really have a lot working for them. They had, some players, some really young players still developing up front on the D-line. Their entire secondary was completely different from the year before. I think all three of their starting corners this year were not on the roster when training camp began. Like, that is how terrible their cornerback room was this year. And they were a top 10 defense in 2024. I think Weaver runs a lot of, modern concepts and all that stuff. But it sounds like Weaver is still in the running for Buffalo's head coaching job. He's getting a second interview with the Cardinals on Sunday, so it seems like the Cardinals like him a lot as well. Would not surprise me if he gets the job there. So we'll just see if Weaver gets a head coaching job. If not, I'm sure he might be in the mix. But honestly, I would say the favorite right now to get this job might be Carl Scott, the pass game coordinator and defensive backs coach for Seattle. The reason why I think he might be the most likely is because he works under defensive coordinator Arden Durd there in Seattle, who worked for McCarthy in Dallas as his defensive line coach. So he's got that connection, and I'm sure he might be giving Arden Durd a call here and saying, hey, who on that staff is up next? And I think he would tell him it's Carl Scott. And if you can bring that Mike Macdonald-style defense here to Pittsburgh, I think that that's the kind of system that can get the most out of the talent we have on defense here. I think that'd be an awesome hire. Also, Al Harris, who would run a Dan Quinn-style defense, most likely, here in Pittsburgh. He worked under McCarthy in Dallas as his DB coach. Got the most out of guys like Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland. Could certainly see that being a possibility as well. To $5 here from Sam Robinson, says, if we have a terrible season, I believe the Rooneys should sell the team. We can say they should sell the team all we want. They never will. They literally never will, unless they go completely bankrupt. They have no money. They're never gonna sell the team ever. It's just too ingrained with their family and their history, and they know how much power owning the Steelers gives them in the city of Pittsburgh. So they're not going to give that up. So we can dream that the Rooneys can sell the team to an owner that will be, more modern and be more willing to spend money and improve the, facilities and all this different stuff. It's just not a realistic possibility. So, yeah. $5 from SM says, the Steelers, we knew, died with Dan Rooney. This guy has embarrassed the Rooney name. I think we could be in a more embarrassing spot, if I'm being completely honest. Listen, man, this is about as low as, Steelers fans have been. This is coming off of a division championship and a playoff berth, okay, and not having a losing season in a record-setting 20-plus years, okay? I would much rather be a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers sitting and experiencing what we've experienced over the last several years than a fan of the Jets or a fan of the Browns or a fan of any of these teams. The Lions over the last several years, the Raiders. There are way more embarrassing organizations than the Pittsburgh Steelers, guys. Now, obviously, if Mike McCarthy doesn't work out, it's not going to look good for Art Rooney II. And it will tarnish the Rooney name a bit. But like I said, guys, winning cures everything. If Mike McCarthy can get this team to win another division championship or, improve this team so that they can win 11, 12, 13 games next year, and they're a better football team next year than they were in 2025, something that I think is actually very realistic, by the way, then fans will completely forget this outrage and they will get behind Mike McCarthy. Okay? But obviously, if this team regresses, if they suck, if they do all these things, which, by the way, people were perfectly fine sucking with Chris Shula. People were perfectly fine sucking with Chris Shula and then Will Howard being the quarterback. What was the thinking? Oh, we're going to hire Shula and then we're going to start Will Howard. And if we suck, we suck. We get a top 10 draft pick. We're great. They would have still loved Shula, but I just think that when you hire a guy like McCarthy, I do think you probably do have to win quicker. If you hire a younger guy that's starting things fresh, I think people have a little bit more patience with you. But the pressure's on Mike McCarthy to be good and to be good immediately here in Pittsburgh. I do believe that's the case. Because he's already behind the 8 ball when it comes to fan support. $5 from Jay says, after 10 years of mid-Mike, 12-win seasons, 3 years in a row in Dallas. That's not mid, man. But he says that they bring in another mid-Mike. Oh, he's talking about Mike Tomlin and then saying, see, this is what I'm talking about, man. People, because of the narratives, because Mike McCarthy and Mike Tomlin are very similar in terms of regular season success, but not a ton of recent playoff success, they're the same guy. I don't think they're the same guy. I think Mike is a more dynamic locker room leader. But then I also think McCarthy is a better, he upgrades this offense, and he does run a good offensive structure with the right quarterback. Okay, we do have some news around the league, though. The Dolphins are hiring Bobby Slowick as their next offensive coordinator under new head coach Jeff Hafley. Okay. And then he says the other coaching candidates probably needed him to spend money. That was something that I think Brooke Pryor mentioned, where some of these head coach candidates were like, if I'm going to take the job, I want you to invest more in the facilities, and I want a large coaching staff that that you'll have to pay up a lot for. And I think Mike McCarthy was kind of just willing to take the job because it's the Steelers and he's cool not changing anything. I think there's some truth to that. I think, when they hired Shula and Schulhouse, and by the way, they never scheduled a second interview with those guys. It's not clear that they liked those guys enough to give them a second interview. Obviously they couldn't have the second interview this week because of NFL rules, but they could have scheduled it. They could have scheduled a second meeting with Nate Scheelhaase or Chris Shula, and they never did. I'm seriously questioning just how much Chris Shula and Nate Scheelhaase were in the running here, because they never even scheduled a second interview with them. And right after Anthony Weaver came in yesterday, they made their decision today, and it's Mike McCarthy. So something tells me that Chris Shula and Nate Scheelhaase in their virtual interviews were like, yeah, if I'm going to take the job, I want it to look like how it looks like here in Los Angeles. And I want a giant staff. And I want you to invest a ton of money in facilities and all this different stuff. And Art Rooney, as one of the more cash-poor owners in the league, was like, I don't want to do that. And maybe he should have done that. But it's obviously not what they wanted to do. And I think Mike McCarthy, as a Pittsburgh native, as somebody that loves and appreciates this organization, how it is already, I think Art Rooney liked that. I think he petted his ego, and I think that, got Mike in the good graces of Art Rooney II. And I think that's probably how he got the job. $5 from Lucas Skew says, I'll take McCarthy, even though wasn't my choice, but I don't want rogues back. I'm trying to figure out what rogues means. I'm trying to figure out if you want to super chat again, Luke, I'll have a better answer for you there. But what I'll say is that the offense the offensive schematics get better under Mike McCarthy. They do. Compared to what it was under Arthur Smith, Matt Canada, all these guys that we've had that have been duds, Mike McCarthy's offense, especially with the right quarterback at the helm, an intelligent quarterback with high-end arm talent, like Aaron Rodgers, by the way, can be very successful. Very successful, especially because Rodgers has established chemistry with a lot of the guys in the building already. He's got a year of experience playing with Darnell and Muth and DK and Jalen and Kenny G, who I think they will bring back this year. And then if you just add 2 more good pieces, oh, he probably meant Rodgers. He says, but I don't want Rodgers back. Well, then, Luke, I think you're probably hoping for him to retire. And then a very interesting conversation to have is if Rodgers retires, what's the plan at quarterback for the Steelers this year? Because I highly doubt Mike McCarthy is going to start Will Howard year 1. I really doubt that. Now, there's some options out there. They could go with a guy like Kyler Murray. And by the way, I think Kyler would be a decent fit in a McCarthy offense. He's best in these heavy shotgun, spread-style offenses like McCarthy likes to run. And, I think that there's more, in-breaking stuff than Kyler Murray might be super confident in. I'm not sure if Kyler would be the best possible answer here. But another thing that he might consider is Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton as a bridge. He was a backup quarterback for him in Dallas. Could see him being a bridge, and then they draft a quarterback. It's an interesting conversation and an interesting thing to think about. Because if Rodgers doesn't come back, what's the plan with McCarthy? What is the short-term plan at quarterback? Because I really, really doubt it's Will Howard. Really doubt that. So we'll just have to see. But I do think at this point, more than likely, Aaron Rodgers will be the Week 1 starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers next year. His arm talent is still there. The players in the locker room still love him. In fact, they told the Steelers they want him back next year. And I think if Rodgers is going to come back to play for anybody this year, it would be for Mike McCarthy. So I think more than likely Rodgers will be back next season. $2 from Rodgers. Steelers is $2 from Rodgers is who would be the OC or DC? Who are his connections? Let's take a look at that, Gage. I believe I have a couple of graphics here going over some OC connections and some defensive coordinator connections. So let's start with the DC. The ones that he has pretty clear connections to are Carl Scott and Leslie Frazier, who are in Seattle. Scott never worked under McCarthy, but he does work for Arden Durd in Seattle, who worked for McCarthy in Dallas as his D-line coach. And Scott, he's helped develop, Devon Witherspoon and, a lot of those guys that are playing so well in the Seattle Seahawks secondary this season would love a Mike Macdonald-style defense. I think Carl Scott's one of my top guys I would be considering. Leslie Frazier, somebody that's been a long-time defensive coordinator in this league, has been really, really good. Split safety style defense, and obviously he's with Mike Macdonald in Seattle right now. He's an older guy, kind of like McCarthy. He's not young, but I think he would probably run a more modern defense here in Pittsburgh. Al Harris worked under Dan Quinn and Mike McCarthy in Dallas as the DB's coach, helped develop Trayvon Diggs and Deron Bland, got the most out of those guys. And then Joe Witt Jr., another guy that coached on McCarthy's coaching staff in Dallas. He helped lead Washington to a NFC Championship game in 2024, but he was just fired after that defense kind of crumbled this past year. So those would probably be the 4 most likely as we stand here today. My favorite among this group is definitely Carl Scott, but we'll just have to see who they bring in for interviews. In terms of some of the other names that don't necessarily have the connections to McCarthy, but definitely I would be interested in, at least to give an interview to. You got Durante Jones from the Minnesota Vikings, who would run a Brian Flores-style defense here in Pittsburgh. You guys know how much I like Brian Flores-style defenses, and Durante has apparently played a very big role in that Vikings defense here over the last several years. I would love to give him an interview. Jim Leonard is a big name that's been thrown out there. He's the former Wisconsin Badger. He coached there and was a player there. He's the current pass game coordinator in Denver. He's done a really good job with the Broncos, getting some defensive coordinator looks right now. Aubrey Pleasant is the current DB's coach and assistant head coach to Sean McVay there in L.A. Highly doubt Shula leaves L.A. for a lateral move to be the DC here, but Aubrey Pleasant could be an option. Jonathan Gannon, who I believe is a good defensive coordinator. He's not a head coach, but he's a pretty decent DC with some good pressure packages and runs a lot of the modern meta, cover 4 and cover 6 stuff we see around the league. Nick Rallis was the defensive coordinator under Gannon in Arizona. He has a very high reputation as an up-and-coming defensive mind. Patrick Graham, I think he's been stuck inside some really bad defensive rosters there in Las Vegas, but I like his defensive scheme. Zach Orr, he knows the division. It's just a name worth mentioning there. And then Anthony Weaver, even though he didn't get the job as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, if he doesn't get a head coaching job, I would be interested in Weaver as a high-energy dude that players love to play for and does run, a modern defense in terms of the schemes. So, I would be interested in him as well. So those would be the defensive coordinator connections. Did I have any OC ones? I don't think I did. Okay. In terms of offensive coordinators, guys, I do expect McCarthy to call the plays. Okay, I'm not expecting somebody to be hired and then to be the play caller. I think McCarthy will have that big menu in front of him like he's known for, and he will be the one calling plays. But obviously he needs to have an OC of some variety, and it wouldn't surprise me who could he get, because he had Kellen Moore and he had Brian Schottenheimer there in Dallas. It's very possible he poaches somebody from Dallas because a lot of the people still coaching with the Cowboys still work for Brian Schottenheimer. It's possible, that he could poach like a Lundo Wells, who's there, I believe, tight ends coach. He was very close with McCarthy, or he could just go out and get somebody new. I guess it's just going to be interesting to see what McCarthy does at OC, because it probably won't be a play-calling OC position, and I do expect McCarthy to be the one calling the plays here in Pittsburgh. $5 from Rivals says, y'all act like they hired Hugh Jackson. How do you feel free agency will go this offseason? Well, I think they'll sign at least one receiver in free agency. If they cut Patrick Queen, which looks like something that could be on the table, I think they might go out and get a free agent linebacker of some variety. We'll have to see what happens with Cam Hayward. If he wants to come back, if he wants to play for McCarthy, that's going to be a big question mark. If he doesn't come back, you need to get another starter on the defensive line. What are you going to do with the outside linebacker room? Because I guarantee you, Nick Herbig doesn't want to be third fiddle in this defense anymore, and he might demand a trade out of Pittsburgh if they don't trade either Alex Highsmith or TJ Watt away. So, there might be an interesting decision there, but they probably won't sign another free agent. You do have to get another corner, whether that's bring back James Pierre, whether that's bringing back Asante Samuel Jr. or getting somebody else. I mean, Trayvon Diggs is available. I really hope they don't bring in Trayvon Diggs, but he does have a connection to McCarthy. They got to get a number 2 corner. They have to figure out the quarterback position. They have to figure out the left guard spot, and they have to figure out 2 starting wide receiver positions. And they might have to get another safety and another linebacker. So that's what the situation is. $5 from Justin says, not drinking the Kool-Aid, Jack. Who saw this and got excited? Start the fire McCarthy chants at the draft. Rooney needs to sell the team. I think this is an overreaction, my friend. Now, I understand the frustration, but I think a lot of people just got so locked into wanting Shula that if they hired anybody outside of Shula, it would have been a disaster. And I think people look at McCarthy's playoff record in Dallas recently and the way things ended in Green Bay, and they think, he can't coach or he's a bad coach or something like that. But, 3 12-win seasons in a row is pretty impressive, and his quarterback development record's pretty impressive. The fact that his offense is being run by other people in the league, like Kellen Moore and Brian Schottenheimer, and they're having some success right now. Shows you that this offense can still have success in this league with the right personnel. The Steelers have a pretty good foundation in place and 12 draft picks this year, and they're going to have some pretty good cap resources this year. My advice to you, Justin, is to have an open mind. All right, just have an open mind, my friend. I understand the frustration. I wanted to go younger as well, but I think Mike McCarthy has a chance to succeed here in Pittsburgh. I do. He's going to have to obviously perform better in the postseason than he did in Dallas if he wants to earn the hearts of Steeler Nation. Because, frankly, this is a fan base that's tired of losing, right? They're tired of losing in the postseason. And what is Mike McCarthy known for? Losing in the playoffs. So I understand why a lot of people are upset. But just looking at it from a logistical standpoint, I think it's an upgrade from the offensive scheme perspective. Then I think, if he hires the right DC, and listen, man, if he hires Mike Zimmer as the defensive coordinator, I might be there with you at the draft chanting fire McCarthy because, the defensive coordinator is so important to this job and to the dynamic of this team. They have to get that hire right. But if they get the defensive coordinator hire right, like McCarthy did with Dan Quinn in Dallas, I would take 3 straight 12-win seasons in a row. I would. That gives you a hell of a chance to be successful. I would take the number 1 scoring offense in football like McCarthy had in 2023. I would take that shit. I would. And you're not that far away from building a team capable of that, by the way. You're not. So I think I'm a little bit higher on it than you, Justin. But as always, my friend, respect your opinion and understand the frustration here. $10 from Dad says, have to give him a chance. Offense will actually use the middle of the field. Now, that is a good point. All right, this is an offense that uses the middle of the field a lot on these choice routes over the middle of the field. And by the way, I think Pat Fryermuth is going to eat in this offense. I think it's perfect for him. Such a smart player. He knows how to, identify coverage and adjust his route. Pat Fryermuth is perfect for this offense. Perfect. So if you're a big Muth guy, if you like Kenny Gainwell, you want to get the most out of those guys, I think this offense feels really does a good job taking advantage of skill sets like theirs. He says, history of QB development, like I just said, Howard could be legit or could be our Stidham. Start the search for the next franchise quarterback. I'm with you there, Dad. Now, here's the thing about developing quarterbacks in this league. I prefer the strategy of drafting and sitting and developing, okay, for at least a season, because you look at the kind of transition these rookie quarterbacks have to take, right? You go from usually a very shotgun-heavy, pistol-heavy sort of offense going up against lesser competition. A lot of it is RPOs and screens. It's not a lot of full field progressions. And then you go into the league, and a lot of these guys have to learn how to take a snap from under center. They have to learn 3-step, 5-step, and 7-step footwork. They have to learn how to marry their feet with, where they're throwing. And they have to learn a full field progression read offense. They have to learn how to read NFL defenses, and they have to adjust to playing against NFL defenses. Usually, these guys that are asked to start right away are on teams that are not very good. So, you look at a lot of these quarterbacks, and we talked about it this week on the channel, guys. Most of the teams that win Super Bowls do not win Super Bowls with quarterbacks they take themselves in the top 10 without trading up. That's just the reality. Most of them, you either trade up for your franchise quarterback or you get them in free agency or you trade for them. That's what most of the Super Bowl champions have been over the last 25 years. It's not a whole lot of teams that have drafted a quarterback in the top 10 with their own draft pick and then end up winning a Super Bowl with that quarterback. And Steelers have been lucky enough to have 2 of those instances with Big Ben. But there's only 3 other instances in the last 25 years where a guy taken in the top 10 by that team with their own draft pick won a Super Bowl for that team. It just doesn't happen very often. So, my philosophy is draft somebody, have a veteran in place. If Rodgers comes back, you will have a veteran in place for 1 year, and then you develop your guy of the future behind Aaron Rodgers. with a head coach now and an offensive play caller that has a history of quarterback development, like Dad Turbin says. So whether that's Ty Simpson, whether that's, they draft Drew Aller or Trinidad Chambliss or Cade Klubnik on day 2, somebody with some somebody with some really good physical tools, whether it's Will Howard. If you're a Will Howard guy, I think that this is good news for you, because I don't think Will Howard would be ready to start next season. He didn't play a single snap in a game, preseason or otherwise, in 2025. And frankly, for a guy like Will Howard, who wasn't that good of a college prospect, like he didn't have great pocket presence, he didn't have great mental processing ability, his accuracy, especially down the field, was shaky at best. Another year sitting behind Rodgers and then learning this offense from Mike McCarthy could do a lot of good for a guy like Will Howard. A lot of good for him. So, I think it could be worse. $10 from Rumple My Stiltskins. Unbelievable name. Awesome name, my friend. Says, given his recent record, what specific reasons led the Steelers to believe Mike McCarthy was the best option at head coach? Do you think it was a money issue? So I'll answer the first question. I think the number one reason was the stability. And obviously Art Rooney cares about that because he was planning on bringing back Mike Tomlin for another year. And I think the Rooney's perspective is, if you get us to the playoffs and if you put us in playoff contention every year, you're giving us a chance every single season. And that's what they want. They want to be in the running every year. Now, you can make an argument that the Steelers weren't really in the running, especially when it comes to winning a Super Bowl in the last few years of the Mike Tomlin regime. But the reason why I think NFL people respect and admire Mike McCarthy more than fans do is because people in the NFL understand how hard it is to win in this league and how even more difficult it is to win consistently in this league. And Mike McCarthy has 11, 12, 10-plus win seasons in his career in 18 years. That's over half the seasons. It's right up there with Mike Tomlin, by the way. He has more playoff wins than Mike Tomlin. He's an offensive head coach. That's what a lot of Steelers fans wanted. They wanted somebody that was an offensive guy that runs a modern offense that can develop quarterbacks. Guess what? Mike McCarthy can do that. It doesn't matter if he's 62. If he can do that, we're going to find the next franchise quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's number one, is the stability of what Mike McCarthy has done as a head coach over 18 years. The second reason is the players want Aaron Rodgers back, and Mike McCarthy gives the team the best possible chance to get Rodgers back this season. And by the way, Rodgers, with his arm talent and intelligence, is a perfect fit for this offense. It really is, and especially the more modern version of this offense. What people don't realize is McCarthy really changed his scheme when he went from Green Bay to Dallas, and especially that 2023 season. They completely changed their offense, where it became more modern. They started to implement more McVay-style passing concepts, and they still had the option route stuff that McCarthy is known for and the quick screens and all that stuff, but they incorporated some of these runaway routes, and that really did a lot of good things for CeeDee Lamb in particular, who was the best receiver in football in 2023, and Dak Prescott was the runner-up for MVP in 2023. Okay, man, this is that, and then the third reason is his quarterback development history. Whether it's Rich Gannon, whether it's Brett Favre, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, whether it's Dak Prescott, whether it's Cooper fucking Rush. I mean, remember that stretch there where Cooper Rush won 3 or 4 games in a row for Dallas, and everyone was like, should they bench Dak Prescott because Cooper Rush was playing so well? That was in a Mike McCarthy offense. By the way, Kellen Moore runs a Mike McCarthy-style offense in New Orleans. Tyler Shuck looks like the future there in New Orleans. Brian Schottenheimer still runs the Mike McCarthy offense in Dallas. It was a top 10 unit this year. So, it got the most out of George Pickens. I mean, how long have we been waiting for an offense that could take advantage of George Pickens? And unfortunately, it's too late for us. But hopefully the next George Pickens that walks into our building, if we can get a Mekhi Lemon or, a Casey Conception or, Denzel Boston, if we get a really good first-round receiver, then yeah, I think we have an offense that can take advantage of that big-time wide receiver talent. Where before with Matt Canada and Arthur Smith and all these guys, I don't think we did. So I think, that shift from defensive-minded to offensive-minded will be a good one for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then to your second question, do you think it was a money issue? I think part of it was a money issue. I think that's a part of the equation here. I do. Especially because it's not just the salary aspect of it, but it's the investment portion of it. I think maybe part of the reason why the Steelers said no to Chris Shula and Nate Schillhouse, not even giving them a second interview, is because on their virtual interviews, I think both of them said, I want to run this place like the Rams, and I want to have a giant analytic department. I want to have a huge coaching staff with pass and run game coordinators on both sides of the ball. I want you to make an investment in a new training facility, which would cost tens of millions of dollars. I want you to make all these adjustments for somebody that's never been a head coach. And I think Art Rooney was like, I'm not doing that as one of the more cash-poor owners in the league for somebody that's never been a head coach. And then, you get Mike McCarthy walking into the building who's like, I love the Pittsburgh Steelers just the way they are, just the way they operate. I'm cool sharing a facility with the Pitt Panthers. I'll be a company man. And I know a lot of fans want to modernize and stuff like that, but from the perspective of Art Rooney, who isn't that rich compared to other NFL owners, saving money probably was a big selling point for Mike McCarthy. And then on top of saving money, you get a guy that's been a head coach for 18 years, has made the playoffs in 2/3 of the seasons he's been a head coach, has won a Super Bowl, has a track record of developing young quarterback talent, and he still runs a pretty darn good offense that generates results in this league. Those are the reasons why they hired him. Is it the move I would have made? Probably not. I probably go with a younger head coach. But, do I understand why they made the decision? And do I think this decision could pan out? Yes, I do think that. $2 from Grayson says, would you rather Mekhi Lemon or Simpson, also mid-higher? I think it's too early to tell. That's the thing about head coaching hires, guys. We don't know if it's a good hire until we see what happens. People thought Dan Campbell was a shitty hire. And people thought Robert Saleh with the Jets was an awesome hire that year. Jets fans were jumping for fucking joy when Robert Saleh was the head coach. He sucked. All right, Brandon Staley, all right, who's the closest thing we have to a Chris Shula, got the head coaching job with the Los Angeles Chargers. All right, he was gone within 2.5 seasons and was an absolute disaster. All right, we don't know how these things work out until we see it on the field. So, I think my advice to Steelers fans is, even though I get that this wasn't your number one choice, and this wasn't my number one choice, I'm right there with you, and I understand the frustration. Give him a chance. Have an open mind, and try to see the positives of what he does bring to the table, which is quite a bit. He's a very respected guy in this league. I can't express enough the difference between how respected he is in the league versus the disrespect he gets from the fans in general. It's so far apart. But when it comes to Lemon or Simpson, my answer to this question now, because now we have kind of a track and we kind of know where this organization is heading, I think Aaron Rodgers comes back for another season. And because of that, I think they would go with the receiver. I think they would take Mekhi Lemon. And pair him up with Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf. And that would be such an awesome compliment to DK Metcalf in this offense. As an awesome route runner, a great 50-50 ball winner. Even at his size, he's a smaller guy, but he's got a great catch radius. He's awesome after the catch. If it comes down to Mekhi Lemon or Ty Simpson, for me, I'm going with Mekhi Lemon every single time, man. Every single time. And if McCarthy wins 12, 13 games next year, if he wins the division and if he wins a playoff game next year, maybe you think that that's not very realistic right now, but if he does it, people will not consider this a bad hire. But the pressure is definitely on McCarthy to win, and to win relatively big pretty damn soon. Because with a younger guy like Shula or with Weaver or with Schillhouse, this fan base would have been patient with those guys. They would have been patient to give them 2 or 3 years to figure it out. But with McCarthy, this is considered a quote-unquote win-now hire, so he better win right now. He doesn't get a year in terms of what the fan base is going to think of him to go 5-12 for a year. He's not going to be able to go 6-11 for a year. He needs to deliver and deliver immediately. if he's going to be viewed in a positive light moving forward. So the pressure's on, Big Mike. $2 from Bernard says, so this means A-Rod is for sure coming back, LOL. I would say it definitely increases the chances, because I'm not sure if Rodgers would have came back to play for a guy he doesn't know, like Chris Shula or Nate Scheelhaus or Anthony Weaver. I don't know if he would have came back to play for those guys. But like after his time with the Jets was over in 2024, a Jets reporter asked him, who do you think you'll play for next year? And he said, whoever hires Mike McCarthy. And then Connor Hughes was the one that put it out. This is the report. Okay, it sounds like he would love to play for McCarthy one more time before he retires. He loves playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know that. We know the players love playing for him. He's an awesome fit for the offense, and he could help develop the next franchise quarterback of the team. It makes a lot of sense for Rodgers to come back now with McCarthy in as head coach. So if you're somebody that's a big fan of Rodgers, if you want him back for another season, I think that this definitely increases the chances that Rodgers comes back. And then if he steps away, then he can look at some of the other options out there. Kyler Murray can look at, maybe going with a short-term bridge like an Andy Dalton or Geno Smith, and then drafting a guy. You could think about, a lot of different things if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. You could think about Kirk Cousins as well. You could think about Tua. I don't love those options, but they're options that are out there. So I think Rodgers will be back next year, but I guess we'll just have to see. $2 of Joseph says, if no Rodgers, is Simpson still possible / a good fit? Yeah, I do think he'd be a good fit. Like Simpson is somebody that throws over the middle extremely well, and McCarthy likes to attack the middle of the field. That's one of the major differences, by the way, that McCarthy made to his offense in Dallas versus when he was in Green Bay. In Green Bay, they didn't really attack the middle all that much. In Dallas, that's the number one thing that they did. With CeeDee Lamb in the slot, they just fed him the ball over the middle of the field. And, he had a lot of success. And this year with George Pickens over the middle of the field in a McCarthy-style offense in Dallas, it turned George into an all-pro. And by the way, DK Metcalf, who I think is one of the best yak receivers in the game, I think could be used really well by a Mike McCarthy here. And if you can get like a Mekhi Lemon, if you can get, one of these top receivers in the class in the first round, and then you get a good veteran as well in free agency, whether that's Juwan Jennings, whether that's Romeo Doubs or somebody else, one of these really good receivers that are on the market, and you pair him up with DK Metcalf and that really good first-round rookie at wide receiver, and Aaron Rodgers, and Darnell Washington, and Pat Freiermuth, and Jaylen Warren, and Kenny Gainwell if they bring him back. Yeah, I think it would be good. And then in terms of Simpson, I think he's one of the more pro-ready quarterbacks in the class, especially if Rodgers doesn't come back. If you're going to play a rookie this year, if you're planning on drafting and playing a rookie, Simpson would be the guy that I think would have the best chance at success right away. Obviously, because Mendoza's going to go 1, so he's not even a part of the equation. So, Simpson is an interesting prospect for sure. $5 from Zeno says, the Steelers fans expect the best from our head coach. He has big shoes to fill as the head coach of the Steelers. Absolutely, man. And that's exactly why the pressure is on Mike McCarthy to be good and to be good immediately. Okay? If you're going to be the next quote-unquote Mike Tomlin, and I think that part of the reason why Art Rooney hired McCarthy is because his record is so similar to Tomlin. I think that was a selling point for Art Rooney II, who, by the way, loved Mike Tomlin. He wanted to bring him back for another season. So I don't think, the offensive version of Mike Tomlin is an insult when it comes to Art Rooney II. I think he feels like that's a good thing. But listen, man, this was a 10-win football team in 2025. He's going to have to probably at the very least, get to 10 wins next year, if not get more wins than that. And the numbers on both sides of the ball are going to have to be better, and he probably has to win a playoff game for this fan base to feel like this was a good hire. So this is, high expectations off the bat for Mike McCarthy, and, they're expectations that are really tough to meet in year one of a regime. They just are. You have to establish a new culture. You have to bring in new players. You have to teach these guys a new scheme on both sides of the ball. Honestly, the one on offense won't be that different. Rodgers, is carried over a lot of the stuff he learned in Green Bay under McCarthy with him everywhere that he's gone in his NFL career. So honestly, the adjustment for the offense probably wouldn't be that drastic. But for sure, man, he's got the pressure on him to perform and to perform, and get these results pretty quickly. $2 from Bernard says, is Stafford wins a second ring? Is he better than A-Rod? All time, in terms of numbers, no, he's not. I think that Rodgers, when you look at the pantheon of the game, is a top 5 QB of all time. Stafford with a second ring certainly moves up in that pantheon, but his numbers just don't touch Rodgers's in terms of overall, greatness. So, no, I would say A-Rod's still above Stafford, even if the Rams win the Super Bowl. $2 from Sam says, well, at least Terrell Austin will be gone, hopefully. And, this is one of the positives, guys. It's actually one of the positives to this new regime coming in. I cannot stress enough how important the defensive coordinator hire is going to be. Because if you bring in somebody that isn't good enough and is going to, get this defense to underperform, like Terrell Austin did these last several years, I don't think this will be a good hire. I don't. Okay? But where Mike McCarthy has a chance to be better than Mike Tomlin is in his staff building. Okay? And he's built some pretty good staffs over the years. Brian Schottenheimer, Kellen Moore, both of them pretty darn good head coaches at this point with their respective teams. Dan Quinn, same thing, led his team to an NFC championship. Like, Mike McCarthy has had some good coaching staffs over the years. He has. But I have to tell you guys, it's going to be so important to get the right DC because Mike is not going to handle the defensive side of the ball. So whoever he hires as DC is going to have to be a great hire. Because even with Aaron Rodgers coming back, and even if they get a couple more receivers and this offense does take a step forward next year, I don't know if this offense, has the ceiling to be good enough to be like the best in the world and, to win a Super Bowl without a great defense. This defense needs to be great in 2026 for this team to have a shot. And it was one of the reasons why the 2025 Steelers, in hindsight, didn't have a shot to win a Super Bowl this year. It's because the defense wasn't good enough. They got better as the season went on, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't at the level it needed to be. And it needs to be at the level of like a Seattle Seahawks or a Denver Broncos or Houston Texans. And, the Steelers defense is not that far away. They've got some awesome talent. They really do. But they need the right guy to put it all together. And I almost feel like the hire now at defensive coordinator is almost just as important as the head coaching hire. I really do believe that. The defensive coordinator hire is absolutely crucial for this team moving forward. And it won't be Terrell Austin, so at least there's that. $5 from Bagman says, at this point, the Steelers are just a money laundering scheme. I don't think that. If you want to make a money laundering case, you can go with the Jets or, the Cleveland Browns or the Raiders, one of these terrible football teams that are legitimately bad every year. The Steelers are not bad every year. They're good every year. And, that's frustrating because our standard here in Pittsburgh as Steelers fans is to be a great team, not a good team. But I'll tell you what, man, if our down years are going 10-7 and winning divisions and going to the playoffs, I'll take those down years versus winning 3 or 4 games and having an absolutely terrible team year in and year out. I mean, the Raiders next year are going to be paying 5 different head coaches. It's crazy. That's how much turnover happens in Las Vegas. There's a lot more organizations that are worse than the Pittsburgh Steelers. I wish we had an ownership group that was willing to pay more money for coaches and pay more money for nicer facilities and stuff like that. But I do think that this hire, even though it's not the one I would have made, has a chance to be successful, and I have an open mind about it. $5 from Lucas Skew says, Will Howard isn't ready for the team, but Rodgers needs to be done. I'd take Malik Willis. I think that right now, plan A for the Steelers, Luke, I know it's not your plan, but I think the Steelers' plan A is Rodgers comes back for one more season. And, McCarthy will take whoever he believes to be the next franchise quarterback of the Steelers. whether that's Drew Aller, whether that's Trinidad Chambliss, whether that's Ty Simpson, whether that's Will Howard, whether he really believes in Will Howard, whether it's bringing in whether it's bringing in Anthony Richardson to learn from Rodgers for a year, whether that's or Will Levis or Trey Lance or something like that. We've seen a lot of these high draft pick guys fizzle out in other places, develop somewhere else, and then be really good players. We've seen it with Sam Darnold and Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield and a lot of these guys. Malik Willis now was one of those guys. So I'm not opposed to Malik Willis. I'm not Lucas Skew, but I do think with Miami, with them having a Packers head coach and a Packers GM, Malik is probably going to want to go to Miami. And honestly, I don't know if Malik is a great fit for Mike McCarthy's offense. So I think Rodgers will be the plan A for the Pittsburgh Steelers at this point. $2 from Bernard Nixon says A-Rod got 24 touchdowns and 7 picks, 3,300 yards. And then another 2 here from Bernard says A-Rod can still play. Yeah, man, Aaron Rodgers to me, at least last season, was borderline top 20 quarterback. He wasn't stellar, but he wasn't terrible. He protected the football. He distributed the football. He didn't push the ball downfield all that much, but to his credit, and to be fair to him, he didn't have a lot of guys that could create separation. If you give Aaron Rodgers a couple more receivers that can legitimately create separation against man coverage consistently, then I think he can play even better than he did this year. And he could maybe even play at a top 15 or, dare I say, a top 10 level next year. He still has the arm talent. He obviously still has the smarts. You have to have a really intelligent quarterback to run this offense with Mike McCarthy, with the amount of option routes that they run. And I think the players in the locker room clearly want Rodgers. So if Rodgers wants to come back, I think he will come back. And I think that the chances of this offense being better in year 2 with Aaron Rodgers is pretty good, especially with McCarthy coming in. $2 from Bernard again says, I would love to learn under A-Rod. Yeah, if I'm a young QB, man, I love the situation of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And if I'm Will Howard, I'm pretty happy about this hire. Because it increases the chances of Rodgers coming back. That would mean another year of development under one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. You get one of the premier quarterback developers over the last 2 decades in the NFL to learn from as well. And you've got a young and up-and-coming offensive line, a defensive line with a bunch of talent on it, not going anywhere. A new defensive scheme coming in that hopefully is a lot better. I like the foundation that the Steelers have in place for whatever young quarterback they decide to bring in. $2 from Bernard says, Jack, are you tired of me with the A-Rod talk? No, man. I love you, Bernard. You know how much we love you, man. You're always providing the A-Rod questions, and I absolutely love it, my friend. $2 from Roger says, hear me out. Bring Rex Ryan out the booth. Thoughts? Rex Ryan still runs bare fronts. Nobody runs bare fronts in the National Football League. You want to talk about getting away from old school? Rex Ryan is as old school as they get. He still runs the bare fronts that his dad came up with for the 85 Bears defense. Okay, no. Unless he's going to run a more modern defense, and even then, do I trust Rex Ryan to operate one of these more modern defenses? No, I don't. Rex Ryan is more of a TV personality at this point than a true football coach at this point, in my opinion. I think he's super, super old school, and I think it's important for Mike McCarthy, especially because he's 62 years old. The defensive coordinator that he hires might be the heir apparent here in Pittsburgh. I think it's really important that, we get somebody that's a little bit younger possibly and runs a more modern defense. That's what I would say. $2 from Ian Graves says, real question with this head coach, do we draft a QB now? And that's, I think it's certainly a possibility, right? It's also a possibility they just run back the quarterback room they had last year. Aaron Rodgers, Mason Rudolph as a good backup, and then Will Howard as the younger option. It's very possible they just don't take a quarterback this year. But I could also see it being a possibility where, if Mike McCarthy's not a big Will Howard fan, he wants somebody else to develop for the future. I could see Drew Aller being, somebody that he could be interested in. I know the Steelers went and watched Cade Klubnik a lot at Clemson this year. I know that they've got eyes on him quite a bit. Trinidad Chambliss, Ty Simpson. I don't think it's out of the question that they take a quarterback, but I think if Rodgers returns, it certainly doesn't mean you're desperate to get one in the draft, which is a better position to be in than we have to draft a quarterback, right? So, that's where I'm at. $2 from Unreal says, what will happen to Arthur Smith if Aaron Rodgers is back? This is another thing too. There's a possibility. Oh my gosh, dude, this is gonna get so much hate. And maybe for good reason. But, there's a possibility Arthur Smith is back as the OC of this team. Now, I don't think he'd call plays, or at least I don't think he would call plays, but, Aaron Rodgers has a really good relationship with Arthur Smith, and I know for a fact, McCarthy and Rodgers are going to be communicating here over the next several days, and Smith is still under contract with the Steelers, by the way. So, if the Steelers want to, they can say to Arthur Smith, unless you get a head coaching job, you're not going anywhere. And I highly doubt Arthur Smith's getting a head coaching job. So, Arthur Smith might be the number one candidate to be the OC of the Pittsburgh Steelers next year, which might be the ultimate nightmare scenario for Steelers fans out there because they didn't want McCarthy to be the hire. They don't want Rodgers back. They want to go with a younger quarterback, and they don't want Arthur Smith back. All three may be, the case for the Steelers team next year. I hope he gets somebody else, but, Arthur Smith is a very respected guy in the league. I know Rodgers respects him a lot. So, it would not surprise me if Arthur is back as the OC of this team next season. $5 from Justin says, Big Ben said we need an offensive coach. I agree. Who would have been better than McCarthy? I would have rather gone more modern and younger. Personally, I'm a big fan of the McVay and Shanahan-style offenses. And, I think Chris Shula would have been a good hire, Anthony Weaver. But, at the end of the day, Mike McCarthy is our head coach. I'm going to get behind him. And, I'm going to look at how this can potentially work. And I think that when you look at the quarterback development history, when you look at his connection with Aaron Rodgers, when you look at how offenses inspired by him around the league are doing so well right now, there's not that many of them, but the ones that do exist are performing well. If he hires the right defensive coordinator, I think this could work. I really do. I think there's a lot of people out there that want to be doom and gloom, that want to be this is the worst hire ever. I'm boycotting the Steelers and all this different stuff. But, if Mike McCarthy delivers results here in Pittsburgh, man, this is going to be considered a good hire. It is. It just depends on what happens. Like every other head coaching hire, there's a lot of things that happen that fans are super, on board with that don't work out. There's a lot of hires from a lot of different teams that fans are super excited about that don't work. Then there's a lot of hires that fans are not excited about that do end up working, right? It's just a matter of what happens during his tenure. And if it works out, and if the Steelers are good, and the Steelers are winning 12, 13 games and, winning divisions and winning playoff games and, putting themselves in legitimate contention for Super Bowls and get their next franchise quarterback, that's a big part of this hire. This will be seen as a good head coach. Not to mention he's a Pittsburgh native. He knows what the culture is about here. He understands how important this team is to the city. He understands the history of this team and, what the expectation is here in Pittsburgh. He's somebody that will give his heart and soul to this team, and that's something that I want out of my head coach. Not to say that Chris Shula wouldn't have done that, not to say that Anthony Weaver wouldn't have done that, not to say Brian Flores wouldn't have done that, but I know Mike McCarthy is a very respected guy in the league. I know he's going to have multiple options at defensive coordinator, and hopefully he makes the right decision there. And if he does, I think this team's got a chance to be better in 2026 than they were in 2025. $2 from Henry. Says trade for Jalen Milroe? Probably not. Just because, like Will Howard, he is so completely unproven. And in the time he did play in the preseason this past year, it didn't look great. Honestly, I think trading for Anthony Richardson, if you want to go the route of trading for a young but still, high potential quarterback to back up Rodgers for a year, I think Anthony Richardson is more of that kind of vein than, Jalen Milroe. because at least we've seen, the starting point from where Richardson is starting at. But, I think Milroe, first of all, I'm not sure if Seattle wants to deal him. So you're going to have to give up a day 2 draft pick for Milroe probably, and I just don't want to do that. And yeah, a guy like Anthony Richardson has a higher ceiling than Milroe, and I think he would cost less in a trade. So that's where I'm at with that one. Probably no on Milroe, but he certainly has a good ceiling to him as well. $5 from Ethan says, give me Ty over any QB in next year's class, especially in a situation where you could sit behind Rodgers in a McCarthy scheme for a year. Sperry for head coach. I appreciate you, Ethan. Thank you for the $5. I don't want the head coaching position given the way y'all are greeting our next head coach here, and the way our fans treated our previous head coach. But, I certainly love this football team. And when it comes to this situation, Ty Simpson here in Pittsburgh, learning under Aaron Rodgers for a year, you could do a lot worse than that. Now, what I will say is that if Rodgers comes back, I'm guessing he's gonna be pushing for the team to draft a receiver in round 1, because he needs more weapons, and that's the number one thing that I think he's going to go with. When he talks with McCarthy and when he talks with the Steelers about his decision this offseason, and he comes to some sort of conclusion on whether or not he's going to play, I think a big part of that conversation is he's going to say, we got to get better at receiver. Because this past year, everybody just played man coverage on the Steelers, and nobody could get open versus man, and everyone would just double-team DK Metcalf. You got to find a way to get some separators in this offense this offseason if you want to take this offense to the next level. And by the way, they have the resources to do that. They're going to have cap space. They're going to have draft picks. If you bring back Rodgers, he's going to be on a $10 million or less contract. He wouldn't be coming back for the money. So, absolutely. Absolutely. Ty Simpson would be a good fit, in my opinion. $2 from Big Ben says, if Aaron Rodgers retires, what would it take to get Dak? They're not trading him. Period. You could offer him 5 first-round picks. They're not trading Dak Prescott. He's top 10 quarterback in the league. He loves Brian Schottenheimer. Schotty loves him. 0% chance we can get Dak Prescott. But honestly, I know, Big Ben, you're a fan of Kyler Murray. If Rodgers retires, I think Kyler becomes probably one of the more likely options because, honestly, I think he's a pretty decent fit in McCarthy's system. $10 from Javon Bethea says, so, Jack, this was a stupid hire. 62-year-old Mike McCarthy is just another patch job. Art needs to step down with Tomlin. Fans can say Art Rooney stepped down, all that different stuff. He's never going to do it, ever. So that's number one. Number two, 62-year-old Mike McCarthy, obviously it's an older hire and all these different things. I get it. We wanted a younger guy. McCarthy's almost double the age, of the guys that they usually hire. It's also the first time they've ever hired an offensive coach. So as familiar as this feels as Pittsburgh fans, this is actually a completely brand new type of hiring for the Steelers. As much as a lot of fans, don't like that. Steelers fans said they want to change. This is definitely a different, this is definitely a change in terms of the way that they've gone about hiring their head coach. But listen, man, I think it's too early to tell what this hire is. People want to make widespread declarations that this is already a failure and that this is a terrible hire and all this different stuff. But, people are setting themselves up for, if this team goes 10, 11, 12 wins next year, which, by the way, is not out of the question. It really isn't, okay? This team has a pretty darn good foundation in place right now. And if they, go 10, 11, 12 wins and they win a playoff game next year, which is still very much within the realm of possibility, this is going to be viewed as a pretty darn good hire for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, I think the pressure's on Mike to certainly deliver results immediately because I think people have more patience for younger head coaches. And Mike's 62, so if you're going to hire an older head coach, you better be good right away. But, I have an open mind. I'm not guaranteeing it's going to work out. I'm not saying it's for sure going to get us a 7th Lombardi trophy or anything like that, but I don't think it's as much of a disaster as some Steelers fans are trying to make it out to be. $2 from Mexamander says it's time to get Dobbs with McCarthy. I think that's probably actually the most likely free agent that they target in free agency. Because obviously if Rodgers comes back, he's going to have a somewhat of a say in terms of the players that they bring in. And because this offense is so built on chemistry and so built on quarterback-wide receiver connection, bringing in a guy that has experience with Rodgers in Romeo Doubs makes a lot of sense. Doubs is like a pretty decent and by the way, if you guys sent me a Venmo, we're going to get to the Venmos, all right? Just so you guys know, we haven't gotten to any Venmos yet. It's just been Super Chats, but we're going to get through the Super Chats, then we'll do the Venmos, just so everyone in the chat is aware. But yeah, I think Dobbs in free agency, then you draft a first-round wide receiver makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a ton of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if they sign multiple wide receivers in free agency. Dobbs and, somebody else. I don't know who that other person would be, but, there's definitely a lot of interesting possibilities at wide receiver this year. $2 from Javon says, how about Nathan as OC with Mike? Nathan. Just trying to think of a Nathan. I'm blanking on who Nathan is, Javon. Let me know if you want to send in another one to give me to elaborate on that. Just let me know. $2 from Scott says missed opportunity to move on and move forward. Art sucks. I don't disagree. Like personally, I would have moved forward. Like kind of the circle of life for the Steelers has been hire a coach, have them be young enough where if they're good, you can have them for 10 plus, 15 plus, close to 20 years, and then, modernize and by getting another young guy when that guy eventually retires. That's been kind of the life cycle here in Pittsburgh, and it's worked. That strategy has worked to give you 3 Hall of Fame coaches that have all given you Super Bowl championships, okay? And to stray away from that strategy feels like a risk, okay? But I also feel like McCarthy does have a chance to succeed. He's offensive-minded. The offense is not as archaic as some people are making it out to be on Steelers Twitter. I mean, Dak Prescott was a MVP runner-up less than a half decade ago in this offense. The Dallas Cowboys offense, who still run McCarthy's offense, by the way, under Brian Schottenheimer, was a top 10 offense this year. George Pickens was an all-pro in this style of offense this year. Okay, and how long have we been saying we want a guy that can bring an offense to Pittsburgh that can get the most out of a guy like George Pickens? Well, now we have that in Mike McCarthy. And as long as he hires the right defensive coordinator, and really my feelings on this hire and how good the Steelers are going to be next year are going to really depend on who that defensive coordinator hire is. So I think I agree with you, Scott, that it is a missed opportunity to get younger, to modernize, to do all those different things. But like McCarthy still runs a pretty modern offense. And if he gets a defensive coordinator that's going to run a modern defense, you're modernizing scheme-wise while having a very stable, experienced head coach, at the top of the pyramid, which could be a good thing for a team trying to win now and trying to develop a quarterback for the future at the same time. So I think it's a tightrope act for sure, but it's one that it is possible it could have a happy ending here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I guess we'll just have to see. I do have an open mind though, man. Like he's got to deliver results, but like I do think it's possible for him to be able to do that. Unreal says, will Rodgers go on another darkness retreat? Maybe, man. Who knows? I mean, he's got his ways about him, so wouldn't shock me if he went into the darkness again. $5 from Safe B says, I am usually the doom guy with our team, but this pick doesn't bother me. I feel like he can at least get us a young QB and get them developed. And, that's one of the main reasons why they made this hire, is he's got a track record of developing quarterbacks into being extremely intelligent and savvy passers. Like Aaron Rodgers and Dak Prescott, if you would put together a list of the top 10 most intelligent quarterbacks in terms of being able to pick you apart with their brain over the last 20 years in the NFL, both of them are in the top 10, in my opinion. Like, obviously, Manning's on that list, Brady's on that list, Drew Brees is on that list, but, like, Aaron Rodgers is certainly on that list. I'd put Joe Burrow in that category as well. But then Dak Prescott is definitely in the top 10 there. Like, he's one of the smartest quarterbacks in the league right now, and, like, in this style of offense, if you have a highly intelligent quarterback, especially one with good arm talent, you're going to be able to get a lot of yards, and you're going to have an explosive offense that throws the ball down the field, over the middle of the field, all the things that Steelers fans have been asking for years now. All right? They've been asking for an offense like this for years. This was the number one scoring offense in 2023 in Dallas with Dak Prescott, a quarterback that a lot of people view as a limited guy. So, obviously the Steelers need to get a quarterback. They need to develop him, and they need to get the receiving weapons to accompany that quarterback. But, all those things are super accomplishable, in my opinion. So, is it the hire I would have made? No, it's not the direction I would have gone. But now that the hire is made, I'm getting behind Big Mike as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'm looking for ways to make this a success. And I think that the path forward to success is absolutely attainable. I absolutely believe that. $5 from Nico says, LOL, no point in having much faith in this team as long as Art is the owner. Listen, man. The fans wanted a certain guy. It was very clear. Chris Shula was the guy the fans wanted. And I get that. I wanted Chris Shula, all right? Chris Shula would have been awesome here in Pittsburgh, in my opinion. But I think once we start peeling back the layers of this process, it became very apparent that, Shula and Shieldhouse wanted to completely change the way the Steelers do business. And, for better or for worse, Art Rooney didn't want to do that. He didn't want to have a giant analytical department. He didn't want to have a giant coaching staff. He didn't want to, have to invest tens of millions in dollars to build a brand new training facility. And my guess is that's probably what Shula and Shieldhouse were asking for. And frankly, that's what a lot of fans are asking for. But Art Rooney II, it's his team, it's his money. And unfortunately, he doesn't want to spend that money. And, for the price tag, I think Mike McCarthy is a pretty damn good hire. To get a guy for the price tag that you're probably going to be getting him at, for somebody that's gone to the playoffs in 2/3 of the seasons he's been a head coach over 18 years. You know how difficult that is? That's really tough to do. Somebody that's gotten the most out of quarterbacks throughout his career, somebody that does run an offense that can have success in the NFL, has a lot of great coaching connections, is one of the most respected names in the coaching space, in the sport. I think this hire could have been worse, could have been better, but I do think it could have been worse, and I do think there's a chance for success in the future. Brad Johnson with a 2 says, run it back with Rodgers, draft QB in 27. Wouldn't mind that either. That's kind of the nice thing about Rodgers potentially coming back, is that you have options at quarterback. You don't feel like you have to rush this process of getting a new, younger quarterback in the starting role. You have a year to buffer this new regime, and McCarthy, can figure out what the best path forward is to developing a brand new quarterback, whether that's drafting a quarterback this year and developing him under Rodgers, whether it's spending another year with Will Howard and seeing if he can develop, whether that's so according to Tom Pelissero, Mike McCarthy is, quote unquote, very intrigued by the upside of Will Howard. So that would indicate that next year, especially if Rodgers is coming back, that it's going to be Rodgers at QB1, probably Mason Rudolph at QB2, and then Will Howard is going to have a legitimate shot to be the next quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers whenever Rodgers retires. And if Rodgers retires this year, if McCarthy really likes Will Howard, it wouldn't shock me if Howard gets a shot to be the quarterback of the future. So if you're a Will Howard guy, I think Mike McCarthy is about as good of a hire as you could have asked for Will Howard. I really do think that. So we'll see how it pans out. But, obviously if Howard doesn't pan out and they end up drafting a QB in 27, I'm perfectly cool with that as well. $2 on Black Wolf says, I can't believe this man disappointed. Yeah, man, listen, I get the disappointment. I get the frustration. People had, certain preconceived notions of what they want, just like everything, but at the end of the day, this hire is going to be determined not based on what the fan reaction was when the hiring was made. It's going to be determined based on what he does with this opportunity. And if Mike McCarthy has success here in Pittsburgh and we win playoff games here and, we take that next step under McCarthy to being a legitimate Super Bowl contender, then this will be a successful hire, especially if we can find our next franchise quarterback. But, obviously the pressure's on to be good and to be good immediately for McCarthy, who's a 62-year-old coaching hire that's coming in with not the best reputation among the fan base. So, he's got a lot of pressure on him. There's no doubt about that, Black Wolf. $5 from Ruthless says, this is the result you get from clamoring for Tomlin's head. Well done, Steelers Nation. Shaking my head. And, that's another thing, too, is that, Steelers fans, were so adamant about wanting Tomlin gone because they were so sure, that they were going to get a head coach that they loved to replace him. But, that's not always the way it goes, man. You don't make the decision. Fans don't make the hiring decision. The owner and the GM do. And, whenever you let go of a head coach, you run the risk of hiring somebody that you don't want even more or, ends up being a worse coach. Now, I'm not saying McCarthy's going to be worse. I actually think there's a chance this Steelers team is better next year. Is better next year than they were in 2025, especially if they hire the right defensive coordinator. Guys, I'm telling you, if you get the right defensive coordinator, the schemes here in Pittsburgh on both sides of the ball will be better than they were last year. And you have a chance for the roster to be better than it was last year. There's still a lot of reasons to hope for the Pittsburgh Steelers despite this hiring. All right, and I understand people wanted the new modern thing, and that's what I preferred too. But, there's certainly reason to hope and to have an open mind and all these different things when it comes to Mike McCarthy as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right, guys, if you guys want to send me a Venmo or PayPal, we're going to get to all these Venmos and PayPals here. Gage, I'm going to send them to you right now. All right, Gage, our producer, is going to run to the bathroom real quick. I'm going to send these to you. And then we'll get the Venmos up on screen as soon as we can. But for those of you that have just joined us, Mike McCarthy is now the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And we're reacting to it live here on Steelers Talk. So I appreciate all of you guys for joining me here. Going to be getting to a few more questions coming in from Venmo in just a second. Okay. But grade the hire for me down there in the comments section, A, B, C, D, or F. I'm sure a lot of people are upset about this hire because I know a lot of people were very much dead set on Chris Shula. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. And, I'm looking at the live poll right now. We have almost 2,400 people that have voted in our live poll. Grade the Mike McCarthy hiring. 9%, the lowest percentage, gives it an A. 18% give it a B. 23% give it a C. And then half of you are giving it a D or an F. So it's pretty clear that this fan base is pretty pissed off at the decision to go with 62-year-old Pittsburgh native Mike McCarthy. But my prediction, guys, is a year from today, Steelers fans have a rosier outlook on Mike McCarthy than they do right now. I think this team has the ability to potentially, win more games next year, be more modern on both sides of the football, even though Mike McCarthy's an older head coach. Obviously, it all depends on who he brings in at defensive coordinator, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, this is still an opportunity to upgrade in terms of coaching on both sides of the ball. If you can get the right DC, man, I think the offense is going to be taking a step up in terms of the scheme. There's a good foundation in place on offense. You just have to add a couple pieces, and then the same thing goes on defense, man. This team is not that far away. I'm telling you, man. And as long as you get the coaching staff right, and as long as you put the right pieces to the puzzle where they need to be, and those were two things, guys, that were a big issue with Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin, in my opinion, was one of the best locker room leaders we've ever seen in the sport of football. But two big things that he struggled with was, number one, he had a hard time building a staff And number two, he had a really hard time bringing in talent in free agency and identifying veteran talent to bring in. I mean, there's a lot of examples of him bringing in older players that just didn't work out. Hopefully, Mike McCarthy does a better job at both of those things. $10 here from Robert Locke, who says, let me see here. Robert says, anyone who said fire Tomlin are whining about this hire can suck my toes. Yeah, man. Like, listen, if you said fire Mike Tomlin, I don't know if you necessarily have, the standing here to sit up here and say you hate the hire. It's like you wanted change. We got change. Like, that's what we got. And sometimes, that's the risk you run when you let go of a head coach, is that you run the risk of the team hiring somebody that you do not approve of. And, honestly, I don't think it's that bad of a move. Now, maybe I'm just coping. Maybe that's just the optimist in me. And if Mike McCarthy, doesn't win in the playoffs here in Pittsburgh, this will not be seen as a successful hiring. He needs to win in the postseason. But, this is one of the more respected guys in the National Football League, so he's going to be able to put together a pretty damn good staff. He's already been the head coach of two storied franchises, the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys, so he already knows how to handle, a fan base like ours, frankly. It's very passionate, that, has super high expectations. He knows how to be that head coach. And he's been the head coach of those teams while making the playoffs in two of the three seasons that he's been the head coach. And he's developed a ton of really great quarterbacks along the way. So, it's not the hire I would have made, but certainly if you wanted Tomlin gone, I have a hard time feeling sorry for you that, you wanted change and then change happened. All right, then we got one from Brian Ruiz. He says, crazy how many people hate this hire. We wanted our offense to be better. This will do that. I don't like the hire either, but I am excited for a real offense and legit good young QB on our way soon. And by the way, guys, we did a poll on this channel. Do you think Will Howard is the future franchise quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers? Over 70% of you said yes. I think this hire is awesome for Will Howard, because Mike McCarthy has this long track record of taking guys, to really high places in terms of their mental processing. And if Will Howard can become a legitimately high-end mental processor, he's got a good arm, he's got good size, he's got some athleticism. I think Will Howard has about as good of a chance of developing under Mike McCarthy as anybody else they could have brought in. So, if you're a Will Howard guy, I think this hire makes a lot of sense. Okay. Mexamander with a 10 says, I don't like what the Steelers did to get McCarthy. I hope it's 1 year only and get a new QB, a new OC coach, and a new DC coach. Mexamander, I think you're going to be disappointed, man. The Steelers don't do one-and-done coaching seasons. Even if the Steelers go 3 wins this year, I think it would be dubious to think that McCarthy gets fired after 1 season. I think he gets at least 2, but honestly, it might be up to a 3-year minimum, because this is not a team and an organization that fires head coaches. We know that. So, McCarthy's going to be here for, I would say, at least a couple years, 2 or 3 at the very minimum. And then as long as the team is competitive, he's not going anywhere. So, lock in, Mexamander, because Big Mike's not going anywhere. Denon Bowen with a 3. Appreciate you, Denon. He says, I'll be optimistic. Since McCarthy is good at developing, how would you feel about getting a guy like Aller to develop? Wouldn't mind it at all, Denon. Drew Aller is actually somebody that sees the field pretty well. Now, some of the decision-making at times has not been fantastic. The accuracy has been spotty at best for Aller. And he's not an incredible athlete. He can run a little bit, but it's not, he'd be a pocket passer in the league if he works out. But, I also think Drew Aller's the type of quarterback where you give him a year to learn under Aaron Rodgers and you use a mid-round draft pick on him, like he's the type of guy that could potentially develop nicely. Because you look at some of the best quarterbacks in the league, they were seen as very raw prospects coming out. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. Right? Josh Allen didn't even complete, 55% of his passes in college? And then he goes to Buffalo. He struggles for a little bit, but then, eventually he becomes arguably the best quarterback in the sport. And I'm not saying Drew Aller would necessarily be like Josh Allen. He's certainly not the athlete Allen is, but would it shock me if the Steelers draft Drew Aller this year and then they have Rodgers, they have Will Howard, and then they have Drew Aller, and then whoever's better between Aller and Howard is going to be the franchise quarterback of the future? I could see that being a possibility for sure. $5 from Edward says, when are we going to realize that this Rooney is nowhere near as good as the previous Rooneys? Yeah, man. I think that's certainly the sentiment among Steelers fans is that, the Ambassador Rooney and, old Art, obviously were the ones that were in charge when this team was winning Super Bowls. And, since Art Rooney II took over, it has not been the same level of success. And I think that he's viewed as somebody that, is too tied to his old ways and tries to, do things by the book in the old school way and all those different things. And if McCarthy stinks, then yeah, Art Rooney's going to take a lot of heat for that. Just like, Bob Nutting does with the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, I don't think the Steelers are as poorly run as the Pirates. I think the Pirates are a fucking joke, if I'm being completely honest with you. The Steelers win 10 games every year on their down years. So the Steelers are still, when this football team has down periods, we're making the playoffs. We're in contention to make the wild cards and, getting home playoff games. This Steelers team is still, one of the more stable organizations in the sport. It's just we have to find a way to, get past stability and get towards exceptionalism. We have to get back to being an exceptional franchise, and we're just not that right now. Hopefully, Mike McCarthy can help us get back there, but with his playoff track record over the last several years, he's been a head coach, all these different things. I understand why some people are skeptical that Mike is the guy to lead us forward into the next great era of Steelers football. I understand. I do. $2 from Craig says, could Mike hire Nate Scheelhaase as OC? I mean, anything is possible, but Scheelhaase would want to run a McVay-style offense. And McCarthy doesn't run a McVay-style offense. So it just doesn't fit in terms of what Scheelhaase would want. Scheelhaase is going to have a lot of opportunities probably to call plays this year as well. There's going to be a lot of teams interested in Scheelhaase for OC if he doesn't get the Cleveland job. And I just don't see, Scheelhaase wanting to come play for a non-McVay style offensive head coach that's probably going to be calling plays. So I think you can hold out hope that Scheelhaase could be the next offensive coordinator. I would just say at this point, I don't know, if that's going to happen. $2 from Eric says, this is the dumbest thing I've seen for a 42-year-old quarterback. But here's the thing. I don't think it's just for Rodgers. I think, the narrative that they just hired McCarthy to get Rodgers back for another year, I think that's part of the reasoning why they brought him back. But, I think they brought McCarthy in, more importantly, to develop a young quarterback. I think that's why they brought him in. I think that's the more important thing, is that they feel like Mike McCarthy gives this team the best chance to develop a young quarterback and to find their next franchise quarterback of the future. Period. All right. $2 from Craig says, could Mike... What's that? Oh, okay. So are we out now?
Oh, we got one more.
Oh, we got one more. The Forgotten Pittsburgher says, what are the QB options if Rodgers doesn't return? Listen, man, it's not a good quarterback market. I'm just going to lay that out to you right now. Obviously, the one that you could turn to is you could just turn to Will Howard and turn the keys to him and say, okay, kid, it's your show. Could do that. I don't think there's any chance they turn to Mason Rudolph as a starter next year. If Mason's on the team next year, it'll be as a backup. In terms of starting options that are outside the organization, could go with Kyler Murray, who is a pretty decent, spread style quarterback, and I think would be a decent fit in this offense. If you don't want to go with that option, you can go with a bridge quarterback, a veteran like Geno Smith. You could go with Andy Dalton, who has played in a McCarthy system before, and then draft a quarterback. Ty Simpson could do that strategy. Or you could try and, go with like a Malik Willis and see if he would fit inside of a system like this. You could try and go with Anthony Richardson. There's a lot of different things that you could do. It's a lot of different options if Rodgers doesn't return. But I do think that plan A is for Rodgers to return this year, develop a young quarterback of some variety, whether that's Will Howard, a rookie, or both, and then make a decision on the future of the franchise at quarterback next offseason. That's probably the plan that's in place right now. We'll see if it works out. All right, man. So that's it in terms of the super chats. So got 800 people watching. Another one coming in. Cool. By the way, we'll stay live as long as the super chats keep coming in. If you got questions, if you got comments, I'm happy to address all of them, guys. Eric says, hopefully he develops Will Howard, at least a chance. Listen, man, if you're a Will Howard fan and you want Will Howard to be the next franchise quarterback of the Steelers, I think Will Howard has the best chance to develop in a Mike McCarthy style system than he has really in any other system. And like McCarthy has a full-blown track record of developing quarterback talent. Like he turned Dak Prescott from somebody that was seen as like a middle-of-the-pack quarterback, like a top 20 guy, maybe borderline top 15. And under McCarthy, Dak has turned into a bona fide top 10 QB in the game. He has made the most out of top receiver talent like CeeDee Lamb and his offense, run by Brian Schottenheimer there in Dallas, got the most out of George Pickens. So, like, if Will Howard, who's coming in as a 6th-round draft pick, is going to have success in this league, I think it's in a system like this, where, like, if he can become a truly great mental processor and he knows where to go with the football all the time, the way that Rodgers and Dak do, then he could have success here. I do think that. I think he would benefit from another year learning and sitting behind Aaron Rodgers. But, like, if you're a Will Howard fan, I think that this hiring is good news for you. I do. Because guess what? Dak Prescott, 4th-round pick. He developed nicely as a day 3 draft pick under Mike McCarthy. If Will Howard, a day 3 draft pick, is going to have a chance to have success in this league, I think it's with Mike McCarthy as his offensive play caller. All right, we got another Venmo here. And this one is a $20 Venmo coming in from Derek Smith. Producer Gage will get you up on screen here momentarily. Says, what is up, my guys? Let's say Mike does do well. How long would he stay as coach being 62, and do you rebuild then or stay with his style of coaching? I think the best way I can answer this is if he has success, he will be here as long as he wants to coach. Like, as long as he's having success and as long as this team is staying in contention year in and year out, the Steelers are not going to fire him. Like, the only way the Steelers fire him is if it's an absolute disaster and it gets to a point where, like, he has to be fired, which, like, frankly, with the foundation that's in place here in Pittsburgh, I don't think is going to happen. So, it just depends on how much longer Mike wants to coach. And frankly, because this is his dream job, it would not surprise me that if the Steelers have success, that this is a 10-year thing and he retires in his, early 70s or mid 70s. Like, that's not out of the question here. I kind of doubt it gets to the 15-year mark. Like, at the very most, like, if it's really successful, it's like 10 to 15 years, somewhere in that range. I don't see him going into his 80s coaching or anything like that. But yeah, he's already 62, and that's another reason why this defensive coordinator hire might be so important, because you might need to have an heir apparent here in Pittsburgh. If there's somebody that, is clearly, the understudy to McCarthy, that, has the respect of the locker room, like, that guy might be the next head coach of the Steelers. So, I do believe this will be a shorter term and probably the shortest term for a head coach in Pittsburgh Steelers history when it's all said and done. But hopefully in that shorter span, you can get at least some success out of the Mike McCarthy regime. And hopefully we can get our next franchise quarterback out of it. That's really what I'm hoping for at this point. $10 from Chess says, imagine McCarthy has a bad season, gets a top 15 pick, then Tomlin comes back since he is still under contract and McCarthy gets fired or gets moved to OC. So he's saying the scenario of this team sucks this year or is at least below average, has a top 15 pick. Tomlin comes back to be the head coach of the Steelers, and then McCarthy gets demoted to OC. I don't see that happening, man. I don't. I think Tomlin is done with the Steelers. I think, if he comes back next year, it'll be to coach for a new team, have a new journey, a fresh start. I think the chances of Tomlin coaching the Steelers again are close to zero. So I'm guessing if you're saying this, you're probably a Mike Tomlin fan. But I think it's time to let go of Coach T, man. I think his days as a Pittsburgh Steeler, at least the head coach of the Steelers, is done. $5 from Czar Craig says, are there any Houston Texans defensive assistants ready to be promoted or a good candidate to be DC? Any with ties to the Steelers or McCarthy? I'll take a look at their defensive coaching staff here. Because I don't think Matt Burke, their defensive coordinator, would leave. Let's see here. Got it's nobody that's really catching my eye here in terms of their defensive coaches, if I'm being honest. Yeah, nothing much there. And honestly, man, like Houston's defense, it's very simplistic. Like if you want like a modern scheme that's like doing all these crazy post-snap rotations and stuff like that, like Houston, the story of the Houston Texans is they got an amazing pass rush where they don't have to blitz, and they've got incredible cover players so they can just play man coverage against everybody. Like they aren't really doing anything crazy defensively from a scheme perspective. And honestly, the Texans' defensive scheme was exactly what the Steelers ran to start the season. Pretty much exactly what the Steelers ran to start the year. And this defense was terrible to start the year this year. So, I don't even know if I necessarily want anybody from the Texans. Maybe the team that makes more sense to poach from is the Denver Broncos with Pat Leonard. I know Leonard is in the running for the Giants' defensive coordinator position as well as a couple others. But I think Leonard would be a really good fit here in Pittsburgh as the next DC. He doesn't have any connections to McCarthy, but I think probably tomorrow we'll be putting out a video on the offensive and defensive coordinator candidates that have connections to McCarthy that are rumored for the job, so you guys can have a little bit of an update on all that. Is that it? One more. All right, keep them coming, everybody. We'll stay live as long as you want us to stay live. All good. Just taking a second to load, guys. Just give me a second here to get it up on screen. But listen, man, just looking forward to the future here, okay? Like, there's nothing we can do in terms of the hire. Like, I know a lot of us wanted a different hire here, but just looking into the future, okay? You've got a really good setup along the offensive line. You've got Jaylen Warren locked up for the future. You got DK Metcalf lined up for the future. You have Darnell Washington on the team, Pat Fryermuth on the team. I would say you're very likely at this point to bring back Kenny Gainwell. You've got a lot of cap space. You've got 12 draft picks. I think the Steelers have the resources to fix their biggest problem from this previous season, which was what? It was the wide receiver room, right? You've got the resources to get a much better wide receiver room this year. Whether it's you're getting players in free agency and the draft, it's probably going to be a combination of both. And then on defense, you still have the resources to, build this defense into a legitimately modern defense that gets the most out of the talent that exists on this team. I mean, you got a lot of talent on this team still, especially on defense. So, this team has a pretty darn good chance to be, at least good again next year. And then if you really hit a home run in the offseason with the way you build this roster, if Rodgers comes back, all these different things, and you have all the pieces that you need in place, like this team has a chance to be better than we were in 2025. And like we were knocking right on the doorstep of winning a playoff game this year. Like we were, down 4 in a playoff game in the fourth quarter this year with the team that we had last year with all the holes that they had. If this defense takes a step forward, if the offense takes a step forward, this team has, an opportunity to be, a pretty darn good football team next year. So I just want to throw that out there. Rumple My Stillskin says, do you think that Steelers management will make another budget decision for a defensive coordinator like they did for the head coach position? It is possible, but I do think that Mike McCarthy has a lot of really good connections in the league. I think that's one of the reasons why he got this job, is that he's a very well-respected guy in the league, way more respected than from fans. Like the fans think he sucks across the NFL because of the narrative on, the playoffs and all this different stuff. I will say, I think, there's a lot of defensive coordinator candidates that will be interested in this job, especially with the talent that exists here. And honestly, I think Mike McCarthy might even be taking a hometown discount. He might be making $9-10 million instead of the 16, 17, 18, $20 million we're seeing head coaches make nowadays. Like, he might be taking a huge hometown discount, and that could open up some money for the Steelers to hire a big-time DC. And that would be great. If they could get, a legitimate high-end DC candidate, that would be awesome, man. And I can't stress enough how important that hire is going to be. $2 from Justin says, the standards is officially below standards, shaking my head. And like I said, man, this is going to come down to how the team performs in this Mike McCarthy era. If they stink, then you're right, Justin. This will officially get below standards. But guess what? People wanted Mike Tomlin gone. So it's hard for me to feel bad for you if you wanted Mike Tomlin gone. And then, he ends up walking away. And then, the coach that we end up getting is worse. I don't feel sorry for you. But, if Mike McCarthy wins, which is not an impossibility as I've been discussing, okay, there's a legitimate chance that this team is better next year with Mike McCarthy than it was under Mike Tomlin in 2025. There's a very real possibility of that happening at this point. And if that happens, Steelers fans will not care. Just like how Steelers fans hated Aaron Rodgers and hated the idea of bringing him in. And then when Rodgers was playing well this year, everyone loved him. Winning cures everything, period. And if Mike McCarthy wins here in Pittsburgh, Steelers fans will like him. If he doesn't win here in Pittsburgh, particularly in the postseason, they will not like him. So the pressure is on because McCarthy has a narrative around him that he can't win in the postseason and all this different shit, the same stuff that people said about Tomlin. But if he comes in here and he develops the next franchise quarterback of this team, which he has a long track record of doing, if he delivers the first playoff win here in Pittsburgh in a decade, that'll be something that he will be celebrated for. If he wins the first Super Bowl in over a decade here in Pittsburgh, he will be celebrated for that. And he'll be the Steelers legend as a Pittsburgh native if he wins a Super Bowl here. Now, I understand a lot of people don't think that that's a realistic possibility, and they think he sucks, and they think that, it's a foregone conclusion that this is going to be a failure. But the only thing I can say to you guys is try to have an open mind. Try to have an open mind. There's a lot to like about this hire, even if it's not the number one choice that you had. It's not my number one choice, by the way. I wanted Chris Shula. I wanted Anthony Weaver or Brian Flores or Nate Scheelhaus. I would have been fine with Scheelhaus as well. I wanted to go younger. I wanted to go more modern. I wanted this team to make an investment in the future. But listen, man, there's some good to go with Mike McCarthy as well. And I think it's important, like we try to do here on the channel, to take the good with the bad. I'm not going to, say Mike McCarthy comes with zero concerns, because he clearly does. He does come with concerns. He needs to hire the right defensive coordinator. All right, he needs to deliver the next franchise quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers for this hire to be worth it. There's a lot of things that McCarthy has to get right, and he's going to have to walk that tightrope if this is going to be deemed a success. But, For all the people that are doom and gloom right now, I'm telling you, there's more to like about this hire than what is to initially be believed, in my opinion. Yeah, man. But I understand the frustration. I do. All right. Is that it? That's it. All right, man. Well, I think we're gonna get off live here. I appreciate each and every one of your support. It's going to be an interesting offseason, man, because I do think with an offensive-minded guy coming in here that the wide receiver position is going to be a priority. I believe that, hopefully this team and this defense in particular can take a step forward with a better, more modern defensive coordinator, and McCarthy has still the opportunity to do that. But yes, man, it's going to be a lot of change happening in Pittsburgh this year. And I'll just leave you guys with a little bit of a message here that I've been saying all throughout the show. And this is what the message I've been trying to get across is that even though it might not be your number one choice, or it's not a choice that you would have preferred, or you would have liked to go in a different direction altogether, I understand that. That's what I was with you guys on throughout this entire process. But I'm also willing to take a step back from my own ego and what I would have wanted and look at the reasons why this hire was made, and then to have an open mind for when we get into next season. Because this hire, at the end of the day, guys, it's not going to be determined, and how good this hire is not going to be determined today. This hire and how good it is going to be determined over the next several years here in Pittsburgh. It's going to be determined by whether or not we can get our next franchise quarterback under this next regime. It's going to be determined by how many playoff games we can win here in Pittsburgh. It's going to be determined by if we can win a Super Bowl, and we just don't know the answers to those questions as we sit here today. I'm willing to have an open mind, and we're going to continue to have an open mind here on Steelers Talk all throughout the offseason when it comes to the Mike McCarthy era. We're going to try and be proactive and try to find solutions to try and make this team a better football team heading into next season so that we can defend our division championship and hopefully win our first playoff game in a decade next season. And if this offseason goes the way that it could, and I do believe we're one offseason away from truly being one of the better teams in the National Football League, I think Mike McCarthy will be seen as somebody that's almost like a hero in Pittsburgh. As crazy as it sounds right now with how much, this fan base hates this hire. But at the end of the day, how good this hire will not be determined today, guys. It will be determined over the next several years. I have hope for the future. I do have some concerns and questions as we head into the future here with Mike McCarthy as our head coach. But that does not guarantee that this will be a failure, that this will not work, that we will continue to be in purgatory like we have been over the last several years. And, I'm hoping for the best with Mike McCarthy, and I wish him the best of luck as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We're going to get you guys a bunch of coverage as we build out this coaching staff and this roster all throughout the 2026 offseason. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.